In this video, we're going to be breaking down the worst family massacres in 2025. Let's get started. First up, we got Long Family Murder-Suicide, Madbury, New Hampshire, USA. Emily Long, a 4-year-old mother and restaurant operations director, shot and killed her husband Ryan Long and their 2 children before taking her own life in their Madbury, New Hampshire home on the 18th of August 2025. The tragic event left their surviving toddler orphaned and devastated a close-knit community of fewer than 2,000 residents. This devastating family annihilation shocked neighbors who knew the Longs as an active, engaged family that seemed to embody the ideal of small-town American life. Madbury, New Hampshire, represents the quintessential small American town, nestled in the scenic Seacoast region about 15 miles northwest of Portsmouth and just a few miles from the University of New Hampshire campus in Durham. With a population hovering just under 2,000 residents, Madbury is the type of community where everyone knows their neighbors. Children ride bikes freely through tree-lined neighborhoods, and families regularly set up lemonade stands on warm summer afternoons that draw friendly passers-by who stop to chat and support local kids. The town sits in Strafford County and maintains that classic New England charm with its mix of historic homes, rural landscapes, and suburban developments that attract families seeking a peaceful place to raise children. Madbury's proximity to the University of New Hampshire means it draws many academic families and professionals who appreciate the small-town atmosphere while maintaining access to educational and cultural opportunities. The Long family lived on Moharamet Drive, a quiet residential street that perfectly captured the essence of suburban family life. This neighborhood was known for its sense of community, where families gathered outside during pleasant weather, children played together across property lines, and neighbors greeted each other warmly during morning walks or evening strolls. It was exactly the type of street where the American dream seemed alive and well, where families felt safe and connected to their community. Ryan Michael Long, 48 years old at the time of his death, had become a pillar of the local educational community through his work as a school psychologist at Oyster River Middle School in nearby Durham. His journey to this position represented a significant career transformation that spoke to his character and values. After graduating from the University of New Hampshire with a bachelor's degree in communications, Ryan initially pursued a completely different path, moving across the country to Hollywood, where he worked in marketing for Sony Pictures Entertainment. However, the entertainment industry ultimately didn't fulfill Ryan's deeper values and desire to make a meaningful impact on people's lives. As he later explained in interviews, sitting in a cubicle for 40 hours a week felt like a nightmare for someone with his creative personality and community-minded values. In 2004, Ryan made the significant decision to return to New Hampshire, driven by his desire to pursue work that would allow him to give back to his community and help others. This career change led Ryan back to the University of New Hampshire, where he earned a master's degree in mental health counseling in 2007. His commitment to education and professional development didn't stop there. In 2015, he completed a doctorate in psychology from the University of Southern Maine, demonstrating his dedication to becoming the best possible mental health professional he could be. Ryan's career in school psychology began in 2009 when he took his first position in the Shaker Regional School District in Belmont, New Hampshire. After more than 7 years working with both middle school and high school students in Belmont, Ryan joined Moharamet Elementary School in Madbury in 2016, before moving to Oyster River Middle School the following year. This progression showed his dedication to finding the right fit for his skills and passion for helping young people. At Oyster River Middle School, Ryan had worked for 9 years as of 2025, building deep relationships with students, families, and colleagues. He was known for his active involvement in the school community, regularly attending sporting events, sitting in classrooms to observe and support students, and maintaining a visible, approachable presence throughout the school. Colleagues and parents consistently described him as someone who genuinely cared about every student's well-being and success. In addition to his full-time role at the middle school, Ryan also worked as a part-time adjunct instructor in Plymouth State University's graduate programs, sharing his knowledge and experience with the next generation of school psychologists. This teaching role reflected his commitment to the broader field of school psychology and his desire to mentor others entering the profession. Ryan was also a licensed clinical mental health counselor and board-certified behavioral analyst, credentials that spoke to his comprehensive training and expertise in supporting children and adolescents with various emotional, behavioral, and learning challenges. His colleagues remember him as someone who truly lived his professional values, approaching his work with passion and viewing his position as a dream job rather than just employment. Emily Dawn Long, 34 years old, had her own impressive professional background and deep connections to the local community. She was a graduate of Oyster River High School, the same school system where her husband would later work, and had continued her education at the University of New Hampshire, earning a degree in hospitality management. This educational background prepared her well for her role in restaurant operations and business management. Emily had worked for Wingett's, a popular local chicken wing restaurant chain, since 2018, eventually rising to the position of Director of Operations. Wingett's operated 3 locations in the New Hampshire Seacoast area: Dover, Hampton, and Newmarket. In her role, Emily was responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations across these locations, managing financial processes, coordinating with staff, and ensuring the smooth running of the business. Derek Fisher, the owner of Wingett's, had come to trust Emily completely, considering her his number 2 in the company. Their working relationship had developed over 7 years, during which Emily had proven herself to be capable, reliable, and dedicated to the success of the business. Fisher later described how he had given Emily significant responsibility and access to company finances because of this trust, a decision that would later prove to have devastating consequences. According to her LinkedIn profile at the time of her death, Emily was actively seeking new career opportunities, looking for positions such as business development consultant, executive assistant, personal assistant, people operations specialist, and director of operations. This job search may have been connected to the unraveling situation at Wingett's, though the exact timeline and motivations remain unclear. The Long family included 3 children who were the center of Ryan and Emily's world. Parker Long, 8 years old, was described by family members as a boy who loved hockey and lacrosse, sports that are particularly popular in New Hampshire. Those who knew him remember a child who was active, engaged, and enjoyed the outdoor activities that make New Hampshire such an appealing place for families. Ryan Long, the couple's 6-year-old daughter who shared her father's name, was remembered as incredibly smart, with a bright personality that had been evident from the beginning, according to family members. The practice of naming a daughter after her father, while uncommon, reflected the close family bonds and perhaps Ryan's special relationship with this child. The couple's 3rd child, a toddler whose name has never been publicly released to protect their privacy, would become the sole survivor of the tragedy that befell the family. This child's survival and future well-being became a central concern for both authorities and the community in the aftermath of the murders. Family members who visited the Longs as recently as May 2025, just 3 months before the tragedy, described them as a beautiful family who seemed to embody the best of family life. During these visits, they observed the children riding their bikes and electric cars around the neighborhood, activities that perfectly captured the safe, family-friendly environment of Moharamet Drive. The Long family was well integrated into their community, participating in neighborhood activities and maintaining friendly relationships with their neighbors. The children were regular fixtures in the neighborhood, often playing outside and engaging with other families on the street. Their lemonade stands had become a charming neighborhood tradition, with residents looking forward to these small entrepreneurial ventures that brought smiles and fostered community connections. However, beneath this picture of small-town family happiness, serious challenges were beginning to emerge that would ultimately lead to unimaginable tragedy. The foundation of this seemingly stable family life was about to be severely tested by a combination of health crises, financial pressures, and mental health struggles that would prove overwhelming. The events that led to the 18th of August 2025 tragedy began months earlier with a medical diagnosis that would change everything for the Long family. In April 2025, Ryan Long received devastating news that would alter the trajectory of their lives forever. He had been diagnosed with glioblastoma, one of the most aggressive and deadly forms of brain cancer. Glioblastoma is a particularly cruel form of cancer that affects the brain and spinal cord. It's characterized by its rapid growth and resistance to treatment, with most patients surviving only 12 to 18 months after diagnosis. The tumors are highly invasive, spreading quickly through brain tissue and causing a range of neurological symptoms that can dramatically affect personality, cognitive function, and quality of life. For Ryan, a man who had dedicated his career to helping others with their mental and emotional challenges, this diagnosis represented not just a threat to his life but to his identity and ability to continue the work he loved. As a school psychologist, Ryan understood better than most the psychological impact of serious illness, both on patients and their families. The diagnosis came at a particularly challenging time, as Ryan was deeply established in his career and the family was actively engaged in their community life. The children were thriving in school and activities, and Emily was successfully managing her responsibilities at Wingett's, The cancer diagnosis threatened to upend all of these carefully built aspects of their life. Emily took on the role of primary caregiver and family spokesperson, beginning to document their journey on social media platforms, particularly TikTok, where she posted videos under the username EmilyLong41. She described herself in her bio as the brain cancer wife, an identity that reflected how completely the disease had come to define her daily existence and sense of self. These TikTok videos provided an unprecedented window into the reality of living with a terminal cancer diagnosis. Emily spoke candidly about the challenges of watching her husband undergo surgery, chemotherapy, and various experimental treatments. She described the side effects that affected Ryan's personality and behavior, including increased irritability, seizures, and cognitive changes that made him sometimes unrecognizable as the gentle, caring man she had married. The videos revealed the enormous emotional toll that caregiving was taking on Emily. She spoke about feeling isolated and overwhelmed, struggling to maintain normalcy for their 3 children while also managing Ryan's medical care and her own full-time job. The constant stress of medical appointments, treatment schedules, and the uncertainty of Ryan's prognosis created a level of pressure that few people can truly understand unless they've experienced it themselves. As spring turned to summer, Emily's social media posts became increasingly revealing about her deteriorating mental health. She began to speak openly about feeling depressed, reclusive, and disconnected from the social activities and relationships that had previously brought her joy. In one particularly telling video, she mentioned that she had declined 98% of all offers for social activities, preferring to stay home with her children and husband. The isolation that Emily described is unfortunately common among caregivers of terminally ill patients. The demands of medical care, combined with the emotional stress of watching a loved one suffer, often lead caregivers to withdraw from their support systems at the very time when they need them most. Emily's situation was particularly challenging because she was trying to maintain her professional responsibilities while also being the primary caregiver for Ryan and the primary parent responsible for their 3 children. During this same period, completely unknown to Ryan or anyone outside the Wingets organization, Emily had been engaged in a pattern of financial crimes that would eventually total hundreds of thousands of dollars. Beginning in January 2023, more than a year before Ryan's cancer diagnosis, Emily had allegedly begun embezzling money from Wingets in a sophisticated scheme that involved multiple methods of theft. The embezzlement operation that Emily allegedly conducted was both systematic and extensive. According to Derek Fisher's later statements to police, Emily had been writing checks to herself from company accounts and depositing them into her personal bank accounts. She also allegedly took cash deposits that were supposed to go into Wingets' business accounts and instead kept them for personal use. What made the scheme particularly effective was Emily's position of trust within the organization. As director of operations, she had legitimate access to company finances and banking information. Derek Fisher had given her this level of access because of their 7-year working relationship and his complete trust in her integrity. This trust meant that her financial activities went unquestioned for an extended period. The scale of the alleged theft was staggering. By the time Derek Fisher discovered the discrepancies in summer 2025, investigators would determine that approximately $660,000 had been taken from Wingets' accounts over a period of more than 2 years. This represented a significant portion of the small business's revenue and threatened the livelihood of Fisher and his employees. The motivations for Emily's alleged embezzlement remain unclear. Derek Fisher later stated that he had no idea what Emily was doing with the stolen money. The theft began in January 2023, more than a year before Ryan's cancer diagnosis, suggesting that whatever financial pressures or personal issues motivated the crimes were not directly related to medical expenses, at least initially. However, it's possible that the stress and financial pressure of Ryan's illness may have escalated Emily's criminal activities or made it more difficult for her to find a way to stop and confess. Medical treatment for glioblastoma is extremely expensive, even with good insurance coverage, and families often face significant out-of-pocket costs for experimental treatments, travel to specialized medical centers, and other expenses not covered by insurance. Derek Fisher first became aware that something was wrong with Wingets' finances in June 2025, when his bank contacted him about unusual transactions involving Emily's personal accounts. This alert prompted Fisher and his bookkeeper to conduct a thorough review of the company's financial records, during which they discovered the pattern of checks written to Emily and deposited into her personal accounts. On the 18th of June 2025, Fisher confronted Emily about the financial discrepancies. According to his later statements, Emily was unable to provide any explanation for the questionable transactions. Fisher, still hoping there might be an innocent explanation, asked Emily to provide 3 months of her personal bank statements so he could better understand what had happened to the missing money. Emily's delay in providing these bank statements should have been a red flag. She didn't produce the requested documents until the 5th of August 2025, nearly 7 weeks after Fisher's initial request. When she finally provided the statements, Fisher immediately noticed that they appeared incomplete and unusual. The documents were missing pages and contained inconsistencies that raised additional suspicions. Fisher took the bank statements to Emily's financial institution for verification, where bank personnel confirmed his suspicions. According to Fisher, the bank told him that the statements had been manipulated and doctored, meaning that Emily had attempted to alter or fabricate the documents to hide evidence of the stolen money. This discovery represented a significant escalation in the situation. What had begun as financial discrepancies that might have had innocent explanations had become clear evidence of intentional fraud and document manipulation. For Fisher, who had trusted Emily completely and considered her essential to his business operations, this revelation must have been both personally devastating and professionally threatening. During this same period, Emily's mental health was deteriorating rapidly, as documented in her increasingly concerning TikTok posts. In videos posted throughout July and August 2025, she spoke about being really depressed and feeling like she wanted to hide under a blanket with her children. She described becoming increasingly reclusive and mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the challenges facing her family. The summer of 2025 represented a perfect storm of stressors for Emily Long. She was dealing with her husband's terminal cancer diagnosis and the daily challenges of caregiving. She was facing the imminent exposure of her alleged crimes and the potential legal and financial consequences that would follow. She was struggling with depression and social isolation at a time when she desperately needed support systems. On the 11th of August 2025, the situation reached a breaking point. That morning, Fisher received a text message from Emily notifying him that she was resigning from her position at Wingets. The resignation came just days after Fisher had confronted her with evidence of the manipulated bank statements, suggesting that Emily knew her alleged crimes were about to be exposed. Later that same day, Fisher made the difficult decision to contact law enforcement. He filed a formal complaint with the Hampton Police Department, alleging that Emily had embezzled approximately $660,000 from his business over the previous 2.5 years. This police report marked the beginning of what would have been a criminal investigation into Emily's alleged financial crimes. The following day, August 12, Emily sent Derek Fisher one final message. According to Fisher, this message was simply an apology, though Emily didn't specify what she was apologizing for. Fisher would later describe this message as concerning in its vagueness, but at the time, he had no way of knowing that it might have been a farewell message from someone who was contemplating ending her life and the lives of her family members. Emily's final TikTok video was posted on Saturday, the 17th of August 2025, just 24 hours before she would commit the murders. This video, which she titled "Making a Change," would later be analyzed for signs of her intentions, though it contained no clear warnings of what was to come. In this final video, Emily discussed her ongoing struggles with depression and her determination to create positive changes for herself and her family. She spoke about trying to shift her mindset and pull herself out of the rut she felt trapped in. She mentioned that her children were definitely struggling with their father's illness and that she was committed to creating normalcy for them. Emily also mentioned in this video that she was planning to take the children to visit neighbors that evening, suggesting that she was still thinking about social connections and normal family activities. She spoke about being determined to create normalcy and getting dressed in proper clothes more often, indicating that she was trying to maintain basic self-care routines. The video showed Emily wearing mirrored sunglasses that hid her eyes, and she appeared to be in her car while recording. The setting and her appearance suggested someone who was struggling but still functioning and making plans for the future. Nothing in the video's content provided clear warning signs that she was contemplating violence against her family. However, mental health professionals who later reviewed Emily's social media content noted that her videos showed classic signs of someone experiencing severe depression and overwhelming stress. Her mentions of wanting to hide, feeling reclusive, and struggling to maintain basic routines were all indicators of serious mental health challenges that required professional intervention. The tragic irony of the situation was that Emily was married to a mental health professional who was trained to recognize and address exactly the types of psychological distress that Emily was experiencing. However, Ryan's own illness may have prevented him from fully recognizing or responding to his wife's deteriorating mental state, or Emily may have been hiding the full extent of her struggles from him. As the evening of the 17th of August 2025 turned into the early morning hours of August 18, Emily Long was facing what must have felt like an impossible situation. Her husband was dying from an aggressive cancer, her alleged crimes were about to be exposed, and she was struggling with severe depression and isolation. In her distorted thinking, she may have come to believe that ending her family's lives was somehow a solution to their problems, though such reasoning reflects the severe mental health crisis she was experiencing rather than any rational assessment of their situation. In the pre-dawn darkness of Monday, the 18th of August 2025, Emily Long made the horrific decision that would end 4 lives and devastate an entire community. According to the official investigation conducted by the New Hampshire Department of Justice, the murders occurred at approximately 5:30 a.m. in the family's home at 14 Moharimet Drive in Madbury. The sequence of events was later reconstructed through forensic evidence, autopsy results, and crime scene analysis conducted by New Hampshire State Police and the State Medical Examiner's Office. What emerged was a picture of a family annihilation that occurred quickly and with what appeared to be deliberate planning on Emily's part. Emily began by retrieving a handgun that was kept somewhere in the family home. The presence of this firearm in the household was not unusual for rural New Hampshire, where gun ownership for hunting and personal protection is common and generally considered a normal part of family life. However, the accessibility of this weapon would prove to be a crucial factor in enabling the tragedy that followed. The autopsy results, conducted by New Hampshire Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Jenny V. Duval and Associate Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Abigail Alexander, provided crucial details about how the murders unfolded. These medical examinations were conducted on Wednesday, the 20th of August 2025, at the office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Concord, New Hampshire. According to Dr. Duval's findings, Ryan Long died from multiple gunshot wounds, indicating that Emily shot her husband more than once. The manner of death was officially ruled homicide. The multiple wounds suggest either that Emily wanted to ensure Ryan's death, or that he may have initially survived the first shot and Emily continued shooting. The exact circumstances of Ryan's shooting remain unclear, as there were no surviving witnesses to provide details about whether he was awake at the time or what, if any, interaction occurred between the couple. After killing her husband, Emily proceeded to the children's bedrooms. The autopsy results conducted by Dr. Alexander revealed that both 8-year-old Parker Long and 6-year-old Ryan Long died from single gunshot wounds to the head. The precision of these shots suggests that the children were likely asleep and unaware of what was happening when Emily killed them. The manner of death for both children was officially ruled homicide. The fact that Emily shot each child only once, in contrast to the multiple wounds inflicted on her husband, may indicate several possibilities. The children, being much smaller and more vulnerable than an adult, would have been killed instantly by headshots. It's also possible that Emily found it emotionally easier to complete the murders of her children quickly, or that she was concerned about waking the surviving toddler. Finally, Emily turned the gun on herself. According to Dr. Duval's autopsy results, Emily died from a single gunshot wound to the head, and her manner of death was ruled suicide. The self-inflicted nature of this wound was determined through forensic analysis, including gunshot residue testing, the trajectory of the bullet, and the position of the weapon when Emily's body was discovered. Throughout this horrific sequence of events, the family's toddler remained in the home but was physically unharmed. The child's survival raises questions about Emily's mental state and decision-making process during the murders. It's unclear whether Emily intentionally spared this child, forgot about them in her distressed state, or was interrupted before she could complete what may have been intended as a complete family annihilation. The toddler's survival meant that this young child spent approximately 15 hours in the house with the bodies of their deceased family members. This represents an additional layer of trauma that the child experienced, though, at their young age, they may not have fully understood what had happened around them. The timeline between the murders at 5:30 a.m. and the discovery of the bodies at 8:20 p.m. represents one of the most troubling aspects of the case. For nearly 15 hours, the bodies remained undiscovered while the toddler was alone in the house. Investigators have never been able to determine exactly what happened during those intervening hours or how the surviving child spent that time. It's possible that the toddler slept for much of the day, which would be normal for a child of that age. They may have been confined to their room or a particular area of the house, either by normal household routines or by physical barriers. The child may have tried to wake up family members without understanding why they wouldn't respond. The psychological impact of this extended period of being alone with deceased family members is difficult to comprehend and will likely require ongoing therapeutic support. The murders went undiscovered for so long because the Long family's daily routines apparently didn't include regular contact with people outside the household on Monday mornings. Ryan would normally have been at work at Oyster River Middle School, but the new school year hadn't yet begun, so his absence wouldn't have been immediately noticed by colleagues. Emily's resignation from Wingett's meant that her employer wasn't expecting her to be at work. The discovery of the bodies occurred only when two individuals, described by police as being known to the family, came to the Long home to check on the family's well-being. Police have never publicly identified these individuals or explained their specific relationship to the Long family, though they appear to have been friends or relatives who had reason to be concerned when they couldn't reach the family. According to the official timeline released by investigators, these individuals arrived at the Long home around 8:20 p.m. on Monday evening. When they received no response to knocking on doors or calling out, they attempted to look into the house and became alarmed by what they could see inside. Multiple 911 calls were placed at almost exactly the same time, with the callers reporting that several people appeared to be dead inside the home. According to dispatch recordings obtained by local media outlets, the emergency responders were told there were multiple bodies believed to be deceased, lots of blood on the floor inside the residence. The 911 calls brought immediate response from multiple agencies. New Hampshire State Police troopers, Madbury police officers, firefighters, and regional ambulance crews all responded to the scene. The first responders arrived to find the two 911 callers waiting outside the residence, clearly shaken by what they had discovered. New Hampshire State Police troopers made entry into the home, where they immediately encountered a scene of unimaginable horror. The four bodies were found in different locations throughout the house, indicating that the murders had occurred in multiple rooms. The surviving toddler was found alive and physically uninjured, though undoubtedly traumatized by the experience. All four deceased family members were pronounced dead at the scene by responding medical personnel. The presence of the firearm near Emily's body provided immediate evidence that this was likely a murder-suicide scenario, though official confirmation would have to wait for the completion of autopsies and forensic analysis. The surviving toddler was immediately taken into protective custody by the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF. Emergency medical personnel examined the child to ensure there were no physical injuries, and arrangements were quickly made for the child to be placed with family members who could provide appropriate care and support. The crime scene was immediately secured by law enforcement, with yellow police tape marking off the entire property and surrounding area. Multiple police cruisers, forensic vehicles, and emergency response units remained on scene throughout the night and into the following day, as investigators began the painstaking process of documenting the crime scene and gathering evidence. The investigation that followed would involve extensive forensic analysis, including ballistics testing to confirm that all four shootings were committed with the same weapon, gunshot residue testing to confirm that Emily had fired the gun, and detailed crime scene photography and evidence collection to support the official determination of what had occurred. For the investigators, emergency responders, and law enforcement officers who worked the scene, the Long family murders represented one of the most challenging and emotionally difficult cases of their careers. The presence of two young children among the victims, combined with the seemingly inexplicable nature of Emily's actions, made this a particularly traumatic case for everyone involved in the response and investigation. The quiet neighborhood of Moharimet Drive was transformed overnight from a peaceful residential street into an active crime scene that would remain under investigation for several days. The contrast between the normal family life that had existed in the Long home just hours earlier and the violence that had occurred there was difficult for everyone to comprehend. The discovery of the Long family's bodies sent immediate shockwaves through the small, tight-knit community of Madbury, fundamentally altering the sense of safety and security that residents had long taken for granted. The transformation of Moharimet Drive from a quiet family neighborhood into an active crime scene created a surreal and disturbing atmosphere that would persist for days. Within hours of the discovery, New Hampshire State Police had established an extensive perimeter around the Long family home, stretching yellow crime scene tape across the street and setting up a command post to coordinate the investigation. Multiple police cruisers, forensic vehicles, and emergency response units remained stationed throughout the neighborhood, creating a constant reminder of the tragedy that had occurred. The normally quiet residential street became the focus of intense media attention as news of the murder-suicide spread beyond the local community. Television news trucks, reporters, and photographers gathered at the police perimeter, though law enforcement maintained strict control over access to the scene and limited information released to the public during the initial investigation phase. Neighbors who had known the Long family as friendly, engaged members of their community struggled to reconcile this horrific reality with their memories of Emily and Ryan as loving parents and the children as happy, active kids who had been riding bikes and selling lemonade just days earlier. The cognitive dissonance of trying to understand how such violence could occur in a family that seemed so normal created a deep sense of unease throughout the neighborhood. Beverly Kettle, who lived just a few doors down from the Long family, became an unofficial spokesperson for the neighborhood's grief and confusion. She told reporters that the children had recently set up a lemonade stand and that she had purchased lemonade from both Parker and Ryan just the week before the murders. The innocent image of children selling lemonade to friendly neighbors created a particularly poignant contrast with the violence that had occurred in the same location. Kettle also revealed that she was caring for the Long family's 2 dogs until arrangements could be made for their permanent care, a small but meaningful gesture that demonstrated how the community was trying to address even the smallest details affected by the tragedy. The presence of these family pets, suddenly without their human family, served as another reminder of how completely the murders had disrupted every aspect of the Long family's existence. The investigation itself was being conducted by a multi-agency task force led by the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, with support from New Hampshire State Police and the Madbury Police Department. Assistant Attorney General Ben Agati, chief of the homicide unit, served as the primary spokesperson for the investigation, though he was careful to limit public statements during the active investigation phase. In initial press conferences, Agati emphasized that investigators were treating the case as a potential murder-suicide, while acknowledging that they still had more questions than answers about the specific sequence of events and the motivations behind Emily's actions. This careful language reflected both the ongoing nature of the investigation and the complex legal and procedural requirements involved in officially determining the circumstances of multiple deaths. The Oyster River Cooperative School District faced the immediate challenge of responding to the loss of Ryan Long, who had been a beloved and respected member of their staff for 9 years. Superintendent Dr. Robert Shapps was notified of the tragedy on Monday night and immediately began coordinating with crisis intervention specialists and mental health professionals to provide support for students, staff, and families. The timing of the tragedy was particularly challenging for the school district, as teachers were scheduled to return to work on the 25th of August 2025, just 1 week after the murders, with students beginning the new school year on August 27. This meant that the entire school community would have to process their grief and trauma while also trying to establish normal routines and provide stability for hundreds of students. Dr. Shapps issued a public statement expressing the district's heartbreak over the loss and announcing that comprehensive mental health support would be available for anyone in the school community who needed it. The district partnered with local organizations and brought in additional counseling professionals to ensure that adequate support was available during this difficult time. The statement read, "The Oyster River Cooperative School District community is heartbroken by the tragic loss of 4 community members. We extend our deepest sympathies to all those impacted during this incredibly difficult time. We have partnered with local school districts and organizations to provide mental health support for our students and their families, and our staff. As we prepare for the coming school year, our commitment remains to the well-being of our students, staff, and their families." Ryan's colleagues at Oyster River Middle School were particularly affected by the loss, as they had worked closely with him for nearly a decade and knew him as both a professional colleague and a friend. Many staff members gathered for crisis meetings at the district's administrative offices, where they could process their grief together and receive support from mental health professionals. Students who had worked with Ryan over the years were also deeply affected by his death. As a school psychologist, Ryan had built meaningful relationships with many students who had sought his help with academic, social, or emotional challenges. These students now faced the additional trauma of losing someone who had been a source of support and stability in their lives. Derek Fisher, Emily's employer at Winget's, found himself in a uniquely difficult position as he processed both the shock of the murders and the revelation that Emily had allegedly been stealing from his business for years. In interviews with media outlets, Fisher struggled to reconcile his memories of Emily as a trusted employee and caring mother with the evidence of financial crimes and the reality of the violence she had committed. "I'm still kind of in shock," Fisher told reporters. "I don't really believe that she was capable of doing something like that." Fisher described how he had trusted Emily completely and had loved her children, like his own, making both the financial betrayal and the murders even more difficult to comprehend. The financial impact on Fisher's business was significant, with the alleged theft of $660,000 representing a substantial portion of Wingetz's revenue over the previous 2.5 years. However, Fisher indicated that he would not be seeking recovery from Emily's estate, citing concern for the surviving toddler who would likely be the beneficiary of any family assets. The surviving toddler immediately became the focus of intense concern and protection efforts from both authorities and the community. The child was initially placed in emergency custody with the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth and Families, DCYF, before being placed with family members who could provide appropriate care and support. Recognizing the extraordinary circumstances facing this child, community members and organizations quickly mobilized to provide financial support for their future needs. The Lee Fire Association, located in the neighboring town of Lee, organized a fundraising event just 2 days after the murders, on Wednesday, August 20. This event raised over $8,000 in a single evening, demonstrating the community's commitment to supporting the child's long-term well-being. Chris Gallum, president of the Lee Fire Association, described the event as one of those touching moments where the community's response was overwhelming. "I'm so moved by people's response," he said. "People needed to get together. Everybody wants to do what's right for the community." An online fundraising campaign was also established for the surviving child, which ultimately collected more than $125,000 from donors, both locally and from around the country, who were moved by the child's tragic circumstances. These funds were placed in trust to provide for the child's immediate and long-term needs, including housing, education, medical care, and therapeutic services. The criminal investigation into Emily's alleged embezzlement was effectively closed with her death, though the documentation of the financial crimes was preserved for potential civil proceedings and insurance claims. Hampton Police Chief Alex Reno indicated that his department had not yet begun a thorough investigation of the embezzlement allegations before the murder-suicide occurred, so it was impossible to determine whether the evidence would have been sufficient to support criminal charges. The autopsies scheduled for Wednesday, the 20th of August 2025, were conducted by the State Medical Examiner's Office in Concord, New Hampshire. These examinations were crucial for officially determining the cause and manner of death for each family member and providing the forensic evidence needed to confirm the murder-suicide scenario. Dr. Jenny V. Duval, the chief medical examiner, personally conducted the autopsies on the 2 adults, while Associate Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Abigail Alexander examined the children. The results of these examinations confirmed that Ryan Long had died from multiple gunshot wounds, homicide. Both children had died from single gunshot wounds to the head, homicide, and Emily Long had died from a single self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, suicide. The release of these autopsy results on Wednesday afternoon provided official confirmation of what investigators had suspected since the initial crime scene investigation. The New Hampshire Department of Justice issued an official statement declaring, based upon the information available at this time, it appears that in the early morning hours of Monday, August 18, 2025, Miss Long took a handgun from the home and caused the deaths of Ryan Long and her 2 children, Parker and Ryan, and then took her own life immediately thereafter. This official determination allowed investigators to close the homicide investigation and focus their remaining efforts on understanding the circumstances and motivations that led to the tragedy. However, law enforcement officials emphasized that while they could determine what had happened, understanding why Emily had chosen to commit these murders remained more complex and challenging. The crime scene processing continued for several days after the discovery of the bodies, with forensic teams meticulously documenting every aspect of the home and collecting evidence that might provide insights into the family's final hours. This process involved photographing the entire scene, collecting ballistics evidence, analyzing blood spatter patterns, and examining personal items that might reveal Emily's state of mind or planning for the murders. Investigators also began the process of interviewing neighbors, family members, friends, and colleagues who might provide information about the family's recent circumstances and any warning signs that might have been missed. These interviews revealed a consistent picture of a family that had appeared to be coping with Ryan's illness while maintaining their normal community involvement and family relationships. The contrast between the public face that Emily had presented and the private struggles she was experiencing became a central focus of both the investigation and community discussions about the tragedy. Many people who knew the family expressed surprise that Emily's mental health had deteriorated to such a severe degree without anyone recognizing the warning signs or intervening. Local vigils and memorial services began to be organized as the community sought ways to process their grief and honor the memory of the Long family members, while also providing support for one another during this difficult time. The Madbury United Church of Christ announced that it would host a community vigil, providing a space for residents to come together and begin the healing process. Long-term repercussions. The Long family murder-suicide created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate tragedy, affecting individuals, institutions, and communities in ways that continue to resonate months after the event. The comprehensive impact of this family annihilation touched on issues of mental health awareness, financial crime prevention, community trauma response, and child welfare in ways that highlighted both the complexity of such tragedies and the long-term work required for healing and prevention. Community trauma and healing initiatives. The Madbury community's response to the tragedy reflected both the deep bonds that exist in small towns and the particular challenges that such communities face when processing collective trauma. Unlike larger cities, where tragic events might be absorbed into the broader urban experience, small communities like Madbury lack the anonymity that can sometimes buffer residents from the full impact of local tragedies. The vigil held at the Madbury United Church of Christ on the 21st of August 2025 became a crucial community gathering that allowed residents to begin processing their grief collectively. Beverly Cattell, serving as a church deacon, spoke for many when she addressed the crowd. "We are grieving. Hearts are broken at the loss of Emily Long, her husband Ryan Long, their son, Parker Long, 8 years old, and their daughter, Ryan Long, who was only 6. We're grieving for a tragedy that we'll never understand, for children who will not grow up, for a toddler who will never get to grow up with parents and siblings." The vigil drew residents from throughout the area, including many who had not known the Long family personally but felt connected to their loss through the shared experience of community membership. Doug Rodosky, a Durham resident who had played hockey with Ryan Long, expressed sentiments shared by many. "A tragedy like this really hits hard, and at the same time, it brings together and reinforces the importance of community." Additional memorial services and support gatherings continued for weeks after the initial tragedy, providing ongoing opportunities for community members to process their grief and support one another. These events also served practical purposes, allowing neighbors to coordinate ongoing support for the surviving child and to discuss concrete steps for preventing similar tragedies in the future. The community response also included practical support for the investigation and for families affected by the tragedy. Neighbors provided information to investigators, offered to care for the Long family's pets, and organized meal trains and other support for family members who traveled to New Hampshire to deal with funeral arrangements and estate matters. Educational system impact and recovery. The Oyster River Cooperative School District faced unprecedented challenges in preparing for the new school year, while also helping students, staff, and families process the loss of Ryan Long and the traumatic circumstances of his death. The district's response became a model for other school systems dealing with similar tragedies, though the specific circumstances of a murder-suicide involving a staff member created unique complications. Dr. Robert Schaps, the superintendent, worked closely with crisis intervention specialists, mental health professionals, and state education officials to develop a comprehensive response plan. This plan included bringing in additional counseling staff, training teachers, and staff on recognizing signs of trauma in students, and creating protocols for ongoing support throughout the school year. The district faced the particular challenge of replacing Ryan Long's services as a school psychologist at a time when students and staff would likely need additional mental health support due to the trauma of his death. The process of hiring and integrating a new school psychologist while also honoring Ryan's memory and maintaining continuity of services for students required careful planning and sensitive implementation. Teachers and staff who had worked closely with Ryan for nearly a decade required their own support and processing time. Many of these professionals had considered Ryan not just a colleague, but a friend, and his death represented both a personal loss and a professional challenge as they tried to maintain their own emotional stability while supporting students who were also grieving. The impact on students was particularly complex, as many had received direct services from Ryan Long during his 9 years at the school. These students faced the dual trauma of losing someone who had been a source of support and stability while also learning about the violent circumstances of his death. The school district had to balance providing honest information appropriate to different age groups while also protecting students from potentially traumatizing details. The timing of the tragedy, occurring just 1 week before the start of the new school year, meant that the entire educational community had to process their grief while also establishing new routines and relationships. This created additional stress for students, parents, and staff who were already dealing with the normal challenges of beginning a new academic year. Long-term support services were established to continue helping affected students and staff throughout the school year and beyond. The district recognized that grief and trauma processing would be ongoing and that some individuals might not show signs of distress until weeks or months after the initial event. The embezzlement allegations against Emily Long created a complex web of financial and legal issues that extended far beyond the immediate criminal investigation. Derek Fisher's Wingits restaurant chain faced significant financial challenges as a result of the alleged theft, while also dealing with the emotional impact of losing someone he had considered a trusted friend and colleague. The total alleged theft of approximately $660,000 represented a substantial portion of the small business's revenue over the 2.5-year period when the crimes allegedly occurred. This financial impact threatened not only Fisher's business viability, but also the jobs of other employees who depended on Wingits for their livelihoods. The revelation that Emily had allegedly been stealing money while maintaining a friendly, trusted relationship with Fisher added an element of personal betrayal that complicated his ability to process the situation. Fisher's decision not to pursue recovery from Emily's estate reflected both his compassion for the surviving child and the practical reality that civil litigation against a deceased person's estate would be complex, expensive, and potentially fruitless. This decision meant that Fisher's business would have to absorb the full financial impact of the alleged theft, potentially affecting his ability to continue operating or expand his restaurant locations. The case also highlighted vulnerabilities in small business financial management systems. Fisher acknowledged that he had given Emily extensive access to company finances because of his trust in her, a common practice in small businesses where personal relationships often substitute for formal oversight systems. The Long case became a cautionary tale for other small business owners about the importance of implementing proper financial controls and oversight, even when dealing with trusted employees. Insurance companies became involved in evaluating potential coverage for the losses, though the specific terms of Wingits' business insurance policies and whether they covered employee theft were not publicly disclosed. The resolution of these insurance issues would likely take months or years to fully determine. The criminal investigation into the embezzlement was officially closed with Emily's death, as deceased persons cannot be prosecuted for crimes. However, the documentation of the alleged financial crimes was preserved for potential use in civil proceedings, insurance claims, and as a reference for other law enforcement agencies dealing with similar cases. Mental health awareness and prevention efforts. Emily Long's documented struggles with depression, shared openly on her TikTok platform in the weeks before the murders, became a focal point for discussions about mental health awareness, suicide prevention, and the particular challenges facing caregivers of terminally ill patients. Mental health professionals used the case to illustrate both the importance of seeking help and the limitations of social media as a platform for mental health support. The case highlighted the complex relationship between mental health struggles and family violence. While Emily had been open about her depression and had spoken about trying to address her mental health challenges, nothing in her social media presence had suggested she was contemplating harming her family. This disconnect underscored the difficulty of predicting when someone experiencing mental health challenges might turn to violence against others. Dr. Benegati, representing the Attorney General's office, emphasized this complexity in public statements. "I think the big thing is to try not to speculate that any one reason something like this happens. Homicide and suicide is usually much more complex than just one reason." This official acknowledgement of the multifaceted nature of such tragedies helped counter simplistic explanations that might blame the murders solely on depression, financial stress, or Ryan's illness. Mental health organizations throughout New Hampshire used the Long case as an opportunity to promote awareness about available resources and to encourage people to seek help when struggling with depression, anxiety, or thoughts of self-harm. The case demonstrated that even individuals who appear to be functioning normally and seeking help may be at risk for severe mental health crises. The particular challenges facing caregivers of terminally ill patients received increased attention following the tragedy. Organizations that support families dealing with cancer and other serious illnesses developed new outreach programs and support services specifically designed to identify and assist caregivers who might be struggling with depression, isolation, or overwhelming stress. Social media platforms, particularly TikTok, faced questions about their role in identifying users who might be experiencing mental health crises and connecting them with appropriate resources. Emily's videos had documented her deteriorating mental state in real time, yet no intervention had occurred based on these public expressions of distress. This raised broader questions about the responsibility of social media companies to monitor content for signs of crisis and to provide resources for users in distress. Child welfare and support systems. The surviving toddler became the focus of unprecedented community support efforts that demonstrated both the compassion of local residents and the complex challenges involved in caring for a child who has experienced such extreme trauma. The child's situation highlighted gaps in existing support systems for children who survive family violence and prompted discussions about how communities can better respond to such cases. The immediate placement of the child with family members provided stability and continuity during the initial crisis period. However, child welfare experts recognized that the long-term needs of a child who had survived a family annihilation would be complex and ongoing, requiring specialized therapeutic services, educational support, and careful monitoring of the child's development and adjustment. The financial support provided by the community, ultimately totaling more than $125,000, was placed in trust funds designed to provide for the child's immediate and long-term needs. However, managing such funds required careful legal and financial planning to ensure that the money would be available when needed and would be used in the child's best interests. Mental health professionals specializing in childhood trauma emphasized that the child would likely need ongoing therapeutic support for years to come, as the full impact of surviving such a tragedy might not become apparent until later in the child's development. The community's commitment to long-term support would be crucial for the child's ability to heal and thrive despite their traumatic early experiences. The case also prompted discussions about how to maintain the child's privacy and protect them from unwanted media attention as they grew older. Legal guardians and child welfare authorities worked to establish protocols for protecting the child's identity and ensuring that their story would not be exploited by media outlets or other parties seeking to profit from the content. Impact on professional communities. The Long family tragedy affected multiple professional communities, each of which had to grapple with the loss of colleagues and the broader implications of the case for their respective fields. School psychologists throughout New Hampshire and beyond mourned the loss of Ryan Long, while also reflecting on the challenges facing their profession and the importance of supporting colleagues who might be dealing with personal crises. The New Hampshire Association of School Psychologists issued statements honoring Ryan's memory and emphasizing the importance of mental health support for education professionals. The organization used the tragedy as an opportunity to promote awareness about the stresses facing school psychologists and other mental health professionals working in educational settings. Restaurant industry professionals, particularly those working in small, family-owned businesses, examined the case for lessons about financial oversight, employee relations, and the warning signs of workplace-related stress or criminal behavior. Derek Fisher's experience became a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities facing small business owners who rely heavily on trusted employees. Law enforcement professionals and forensic specialists involved in the investigation faced their own challenges in processing the case, particularly given the involvement of young children and the complex family dynamics revealed through the investigation. The case became part of ongoing training programs for investigators dealing with family violence and murder-suicide cases. Legal and policy implications. The Long family case contributed to ongoing discussions about several legal and policy issues, including gun safety in homes with children, the intersection of mental health and family violence, and the responsibilities of employers and communities in identifying and responding to individuals in crisis. Gun safety advocates pointed to the case as an example of the importance of secure storage of firearms in homes, particularly when family members are experiencing mental health challenges. The accessibility of the firearm used in the murders raised questions about whether different storage practices might have prevented the tragedy or at least reduced its scope. Mental health policy experts used the case to argue for increased funding for community mental health services, particularly for families dealing with serious illness and financial stress. The case illustrated how multiple stressors can combine to create crisis situations that overwhelm individuals' coping abilities and available support systems. Employment law specialists examined the case for insights into the responsibilities of employers to monitor employee well-being and to implement financial oversight systems that might prevent embezzlement, while also identifying employees who might be struggling with personal issues. The extensive media coverage of the Long family case raised important questions about how such tragedies should be reported and discussed in public forums. While the case generated significant public interest and discussion, media outlets had to balance the public's desire for information with concerns about protecting the surviving child's privacy and avoiding coverage that might glorify or sensationalize the violence. The availability of Emily's TikTok videos created unprecedented access to the mental state of someone who had committed family violence, providing insights that were both valuable for understanding the case and potentially problematic in terms of privacy and exploitation concerns. Media outlets had to make difficult decisions about how much of this content to share and how to present it in ways that were informative but not exploitative. The case also became part of broader public discussions about social media, mental health, and the responsibility of online platforms to identify and assist users who might be in crisis. Emily's videos provided a real-time documentation of her deteriorating mental state, yet no intervention had occurred based on these public expressions of distress. The Long family tragedy prompted communities throughout New Hampshire and beyond to examine their own preparedness for responding to family violence and supporting individuals in crisis. Many communities used the case as an opportunity to review their mental health resources, crisis intervention protocols, and support systems for families dealing with serious illness or financial stress. Educational institutions developed new training programs for staff members on recognizing signs of domestic violence and family crisis, particularly in situations involving colleagues or community members who might not fit typical profiles of individuals at risk for violence. The case demonstrated that family violence can occur in any family, regardless of education level, professional status, or apparent stability. Community organizations, including churches, civic groups, and professional associations, developed new outreach programs designed to identify and support individuals who might be struggling with depression, isolation, or overwhelming stress. These programs emphasize the importance of maintaining social connections and providing practical support for families dealing with serious challenges. Ongoing research and professional development. The Long family case became part of ongoing research into family violence, murder-suicide, and the factors that contribute to such extreme acts. Researchers in criminology, psychology, and public health use the case to better understand the intersection of mental health, financial stress, serious illness, and family violence. The case also contributed to professional development programs for law enforcement officers, mental health professionals, educators, and others who might encounter similar situations in their work. Training programs incorporated lessons learned from the Long case to help professionals better recognize warning signs and respond appropriately to individuals or families in crisis. The documentation and analysis of the Long family case ensured that the lessons learned from this tragedy would be available to help prevent similar events in the future, honoring the memory of the victims by working to protect other families from experiencing similar devastation. The Long family murder-suicide in Madbury, New Hampshire, remains a profound tragedy that highlighted the complex interplay of factors that can lead to family violence. While nothing can undo the loss of 4 lives or fully heal the trauma experienced by the surviving child and community, the comprehensive response and ongoing efforts to learn from this tragedy demonstrate the potential for communities to come together in the face of unimaginable loss and work toward preventing similar events in the future. On the 18th of August, 2025, Emily Long, 34, shot and killed her husband, Ryan Long, 48, and their 2 children, Parker, 8, and Ryan, 6, before taking her own life in their Madbury, New Hampshire home. A surviving toddler was found unharmed. Ryan worked as a school psychologist at Oyster River Middle School for 9 years and had been diagnosed with aggressive brain cancer, glioblastoma, in April 2025. Emily was director of operations at Wingett's restaurant chain, but had allegedly been embezzling $660,000 from the business since January 2023. Her employer filed a police complaint on August 11, just 1 week before the murders. Emily documented her depression and struggles as a caregiver on TikTok videos, posting her final video on August 17, discussing efforts to overcome her depression. The murders occurred around 5:30 a.m. on August 18, with bodies discovered 15 hours later when friends came to check on the family. Autopsy results confirmed Emily shot her husband multiple times, each child once in the head, then herself. The community rallied to support the surviving toddler, raising over $125,000. The case devastated the small town of Madbury population, under 2,000, and highlighted the intersection of mental health struggles, financial crime, and family violence. It remains a stark reminder of how multiple stressors can lead to unimaginable tragedy. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next we have the Pennsylvania Family Massacre. Pennsylvania Family Massacre, North Sewickley Township. On a quiet Sunday evening in January 2025, the Hunt family home on Schaefer Road became the scene of one of Pennsylvania's most shocking family tragedies. 4 family members died in what authorities determined was a triple murder-suicide that left an entire small community struggling to understand how such violence could happen to people they knew and loved. North Sewickley Township sits in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. This is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where neighbors look out for each other, and where violent crime feels impossible. The Hunt family had lived in this tight-knit community for years, and were well known throughout the area for their love of animals, aviation, and the outdoors. Clifford Hunt Sr., 51, worked hard to provide for his family and shared his love of hunting with his 2 sons. His wife, Michelle Hunt, 48, was known throughout the community as someone who always had a smile on her face and was ready to help anyone who needed it. She volunteered regularly at the Air Heritage Aviation Museum in Beaver Falls, where she served as secretary for the past 2 years. Michelle had a deep love for animals and kept chickens, geese, turkeys, and other farm animals on their property. Their oldest son, Clifford Hunt Jr., was 19 years old and had recently graduated from high school. Like many young men in rural Pennsylvania, he had grown up around firearms and hunting. The family were described by Police Chief Jeff Becce as avid hunters who kept many firearms in their home, something that was completely normal for families in their area. The youngest family member was 6-year-old Cody Hunt, a junior at Riverside High School. Cody was everything you would want in a teenage son. He was a member of the National Honor Society, played saxophone in the marching band, and had big dreams for his future. Cody had recently earned his pilot's license and planned to apply to the United States Air Force Academy. He shared his mother's passion for aviation and regularly volunteered alongside her at the Air Heritage Aviation Museum, where they both worked as crew members on a historic Cone 123 Kelvin's Fairchild Provider aircraft, nicknamed Thunder Pig. The Hunt family seemed to have everything going for them. They were described by everyone who knew them as kind, loving, and deeply connected to their community. Michelle was passionate about caring for animals, often taking in new creatures and providing them with loving homes. Just hours before the tragedy, she had been excitedly preparing a special area for some new ducklings that a friend was bringing over. Cody was on track to achieve his dream of serving his country as an Air Force pilot. The family appeared happy and normal to everyone around them. Sunday, the 12th of January 2025, started like any other day for the Hunt family. There were no obvious signs of trouble, no warning signals that anyone in the community noticed. The family went about their usual routines, caring for their animals and spending time together on their property. As evening approached, everything seemed perfectly normal in the Hunt household. The events leading up to that fateful Sunday evening appeared completely ordinary. Autumn Ashurst Stang, a friend who had recently connected with Michelle Hunt through their shared love of animals, had made plans to deliver some ducklings to the Hunt family. Michelle was particularly excited about this addition to their farm, as ducks were one of the few animals she didn't yet have on their property. Earlier that day, Stang arrived at the Hunt home with the ducklings. Michelle was overjoyed, showing Stang the special area she had prepared for the new arrivals. She was over the moon about getting ducks, Stang later recalled. She had a whole spot set up for them, wanted me to bring them in, and said they were ready, and the geese and turkey were checking them out. Michelle's excitement was genuine and infectious. She was clearly thrilled to be adding these new members to her animal family. The interaction between Stang and Michelle that afternoon painted a picture of a woman who was happy and looking forward to the future. There was nothing in Michelle's behavior that suggested anything was wrong. She was her usual cheerful self, excited about the ducks and talking about her plans for them. The visit ended on a positive note, with Michelle thanking Stang for the ducklings and both women looking forward to future conversations about their shared interest in animal care. As the day progressed into evening, the Hunt family appeared to be going about their normal Sunday routine. The animals on their property, chickens, geese, turkeys, and now the new ducklings, were settled for the night. In a rural community like North Sewickley Township, Sunday evenings are typically quiet affairs. Families gather for dinner, children finish homework, and everyone prepares for the upcoming week. The Hunt home on Schaefer Road was situated in a peaceful area where the sounds of farm animals were common and comforting to residents. Police Chief Jeff Becce later noted that when additional officers were initially dispatched to the scene, they heard what they thought might be screaming. However, these sounds turned out to be coming from the family's livestock, who had been disturbed by the earlier gunshots. Around 8:30 p.m., something went terribly wrong inside the Hunt family home. What exactly triggered the violence remains unclear to investigators. District Attorney Nate Bible stated that determining a motive was still part of the ongoing investigation. The family had no known history of domestic violence, mental health crises, or other warning signs that might have predicted such a devastating outcome. The weapons used in the shooting were firearms that the family legally owned. As an avid hunting family, the Hunts kept several guns in their home, something that was completely normal and expected in their rural community. Police Chief Becci confirmed that he knew from previous conversations with the family that they had a lot of firearms in the house, and that hunting was a frequent topic of discussion whenever he interacted with them. Whatever happened in those final moments, it unfolded quickly and without warning for most of the family members. The preliminary investigation suggested that the parents, Clifford Sr. and Michelle, were shot first. The violence then extended to 6-year-old Cody, before finally ending with Clifford Jr. turning the gun on himself. Main event. At approximately 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, the 12th of January 2025, a 911 call came from inside the Hunt family home on Schaffer Road. According to investigators, it was 6-year-old Cody Hunt who made that desperate call for help. However, the call was abandoned before Cody could provide any details about what was happening inside the house. Emergency responders immediately rushed to the scene, not knowing what they would find when they arrived. North Sewickley Township police officers were the first to reach the home, followed by emergency medical personnel and other first responders. What they discovered inside would haunt them and shock the entire community. The officers found Clifford Hunt Sr., 51, and his wife Michelle Hunt, 48, dead from gunshot wounds to the head. The parents had been shot and killed instantly, giving them no chance to defend themselves or escape the violence that had erupted in their own home. The scene was devastating for the responding officers, who knew this family personally from their interactions in the small community. But the tragedy was far from over. As officers continued their search of the house, they discovered 2 more victims. Clifford Hunt Jr., 19, and his younger brother, Cody Hunt, 16, were both found with severe gunshot wounds to their heads. Unlike their parents, both teenagers were still alive when officers found them, but they were in grave condition. Emergency medical personnel immediately began working to save the 2 young men. The severity of their injuries required immediate transport to a trauma center, so both brothers were airlifted by helicopter to a hospital in Pittsburgh. Medical teams worked frantically to try to save their lives, but the damage from the gunshot wounds was too severe. Despite the best efforts of medical professionals, both Clifford Jr. and Cody Hunt died from their injuries on Monday, the 13th of January 2025. The last 2 members of the Hunt family had succumbed to their wounds, completing what investigators would classify as a triple murder-suicide. The investigation into exactly what happened inside the Hunt home began immediately. Multiple firearms were recovered from the scene, and investigators began the painstaking process of determining which weapons were used and in what sequence the shootings occurred. District Attorney Nate Bible explained that investigators were still sorting out what weapons were used and on who, trying to piece together a timeline of what might have happened. The preliminary investigation revealed a horrific sequence of events. According to authorities, Clifford Hunt Jr. had shot and killed his father, his mother, and his 6-year-old brother before turning the gun on himself. At this stage, it does look like the older son, Clifford Jr., may have been the last one alive, District Attorney Bible stated during a press conference. The evidence suggested that Clifford Jr. had methodically shot each family member in the head before taking his own life. The parents appeared to have been caught completely off guard, with no signs that they had any opportunity to defend themselves or escape. Cody's 911 call indicated that he had at least some awareness of what was happening, but investigators believe he was shot shortly after making the call. The scene inside the Hunt home was described by investigators as one of the most difficult they had ever encountered. 4 family members, all well known and loved in the community, had died violently in what should have been the safety of their own home. The randomness and brutality of the crime shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. Outside the house, the family's animals remained in their pens and coops, unaware that their caretakers would never return. The chickens, geese, turkeys, and newly arrived ducklings that Michelle had been so excited about just hours earlier were left without the family who had loved and cared for them. As news of the shooting began to spread through North Sewickley Township, residents struggled to comprehend what had happened. This was a family that everyone knew, that seemed happy and normal just days before. The idea that such violence could occur in their peaceful community was almost impossible to process. Police worked through the night to secure the scene and begin their investigation. The North Sewickley Township Police Department issued a statement on social media assuring the public that this was a contained incident and that there was no ongoing threat to community safety. However, for the residents of this small town, the damage to their sense of security had already been done. The news of the Hunt family massacre spread quickly through North Sewickley Township and the surrounding areas. In a community where everyone knows everyone, Word traveled fast that something terrible had happened to a family that many people considered friends. The initial reports were confusing and incomplete, but by Monday morning, the full scope of the tragedy became clear. Jennifer Lanham, who worked at a nearby Exxon gas station and convenience store, was one of the first community members to realize something serious was happening. On Sunday night, just before closing time, North Sewickley Township Police instructed one of her employees to lock up immediately and leave the area. The unusual police presence and the urgent nature of their instructions made it clear that this was no ordinary incident. "Everybody here knows everybody," Lanham later told reporters. "We're a very tight-knit community. Everybody looks out for everybody." So, something like this is a tragedy beyond compare here. It's really scary. It's really hard to really wrap your head around something like this, because that's a multiple homicide in a small town. You just don't hear that every day, and it's staggering. The Riverside School District, where Cody Hunt was a student, immediately began preparing to support their school community. Superintendent David Anney announced that grief counselors would be available for students and staff throughout the week. Therapy dogs were also brought to Riverside High School to provide comfort to students and teachers who were struggling to process the loss of their classmate. The school district released a heartfelt statement about Cody that revealed just how promising his future had been. Eager to serve his country, Cody planned to apply to the United States Air Force Academy. He also volunteered at the Air Heritage Museum in Chippewa, where he shared his love for aviation with visitors. Cody's classroom teachers and friends would say he was kind-hearted and always helped others. Everyone at Riverside will miss him dearly. The Air Heritage Aviation Museum, where both Michelle and Cody had volunteered, was devastated by the loss of two of their most dedicated volunteers. The museum released a statement that captured the impact both mother and son had made on their organization. "Michelle was one of our most active volunteers and always showed up with a smile on her face and ready to work. Whether she was packing the C-123 for an air show, helping set up and hosting an event, or giving a tour of the museum, she and Cody will be greatly missed by everyone at the museum, and by all of the visitors that she joyfully greeted at the museum." The museum also revealed the special bond between Michelle and Cody, noting that both Michelle and Cody were enthusiastic Cone 123 Kelvin's Fairchild Provider Thunder Pig crew members. They often flew together on the Thunder Pig to air shows and flyovers, and were very proud of the fact that it is the last known C-123 still flying in the world. They both loved and had a vast knowledge of the aircraft, and enjoyed sharing its history with people who toured it during air shows. Autumn Ashurst Stang, the friend who had delivered ducklings to Michelle just hours before the shooting, was among the first to take action to help. Overcome with grief and a desire to do something meaningful, Stang organized a GoFundMe campaign to help cover the costs of 4 funerals. "The unthinkable has happened to all who knew and loved them, and this tragedy has devastated the community," Stang wrote in the fundraising appeal. "This family of 4 from North Sewickley lost their lives in a tragedy that we are all still struggling to wrap our heads around." Stang wrote, "The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, the GoFundMe campaign had raised nearly $40,000, far exceeding the initial goal. The outpouring of financial support demonstrated just how loved the Hunt family had been, and how deeply their loss affected everyone who knew them." Stang also took on the responsibility of caring for the Hunt family's animals. Michelle's chickens, geese, turkeys, and the newly arrived ducklings needed immediate care, and Stang stepped up to ensure they would be safe. "Her animals were her world. They were her babies," Stang said, explaining why caring for Michelle's animals felt like the right thing to do. Working with other community members, Stang began finding new homes for all of the animals, making sure they would be placed with families who would love and care for them, as Michelle had. Local law enforcement officers who had responded to the scene were also struggling with the aftermath. Many of them had known the Hunt family personally and had positive interactions with them over the years. Police Chief Jeff Becci, who had spoken with the family about hunting on multiple occasions, was clearly affected by the tragedy. "The family, all of them, were avid hunters, and in my conversations with them, hunting always comes up," he said. "I knew they had a lot of firearms in the house. What happened to this family is a tragedy." The investigation continued as authorities worked to understand what could have motivated such violence. District Attorney Nate Bible emphasized that determining a motive remained a priority, but he also acknowledged that some questions might never be answered. "We can't speculate on a motive right now," Bible told reporters. The North Sewickley police did a phenomenal job interviewing several individuals. They still have people they need to talk to. Media attention began to focus on the small community, with reporters arriving to cover the story and interview residents. For people who were used to their quiet, peaceful way of life, the sudden media presence added another layer of stress to an already traumatic situation. Many residents struggled with how to talk about a family they had loved and respected, while also trying to process the inexplicable violence that had occurred. The Hunt family massacre left deep and lasting scars on North Sewickley Township and the surrounding community. For a small town where violent crime was virtually unknown, the idea that a family could be wiped out in their own home challenged everything residents thought they knew about safety and security. The psychological impact on the community was significant and widespread. Residents who had felt completely safe in their rural environment suddenly found themselves questioning whether they really knew their neighbors. If something so terrible could happen to a family like the Hunts, who seemed normal, happy, and well-adjusted, then it could potentially happen to anyone. The Riverside School District recognized that Cody Hunt's death would have a lasting impact on students and staff. Beyond the immediate grief, counseling, and therapy dogs, the district announced plans for a memorial scholarship in Cody's name. This scholarship would be awarded to students interested in pursuing careers in aviation, honoring Cody's dream of becoming an Air Force pilot and ensuring that his passion for flight would continue to inspire future generations. The Air Heritage Aviation Museum also announced plans for a permanent memorial to honor both Michelle and Cody Hunt. The museum stated that both Michelle and Cody will be honored and memorialized at the museum so that all who enter will know of their contribution and selfless service to our organization. May they both fly high on the wings of angels. This memorial would serve as a lasting reminder of the positive impact both mother and son had made on their community. The investigation into the shooting continued for weeks as authorities tried to piece together what had motivated Clifford Jr. to kill his family. The Beaver County Medical Examiner's Office worked to complete detailed autopsy reports, which were expected to be released within 30 days of the incident. However, even with all the forensic evidence and witness interviews, the question of motive remained elusive. Law enforcement officials acknowledged that some cases simply cannot be fully explained. Despite having physical evidence, witness statements, and detailed knowledge of the family's background, investigators found no clear trigger for the violence. There was no history of domestic abuse, no known mental health crisis, no financial problems, and no apparent conflicts within the family that could explain such extreme violence. The lack of a clear motive made the tragedy even more difficult for the community to process. People wanted to understand how and why this had happened, hoping that an explanation might help them make sense of the senseless. The absence of obvious warning signs meant that residents could not point to specific red flags that might help them identify and prevent similar tragedies in the future. The impact on local law enforcement was also significant. North Sewickley Township is a small community with a small police force, and officers who responded to the Hunt home had never dealt with anything approaching this level of violence. The trauma of discovering 4 bodies, including 2 teenagers they had watched grow up in the community, required ongoing support and counseling for the responding officers. Gun ownership and hunting culture in the area faced renewed scrutiny, though most residents continued to view firearms as a normal part of rural life. The fact that the weapons used in the shooting had been legally owned by the family complicated any simple narrative about gun control. Police Chief Betch's observation that the Hunts were avid hunters who kept a lot of firearms in the house reflected the reality of many families in the area. Community members began discussing how to better support families who might be struggling with mental health issues or other problems that could lead to violence. However, the apparent absence of warning signs in the Hunt family case made it difficult to know what specific interventions might have prevented the tragedy. The Hunt family farm, once a symbol of rural life and animal care, stood empty as a painful reminder of what had been lost. The property where Michelle had lovingly cared for her animals and where Cody had dreamed of becoming a pilot became a place that neighbors avoided, too painful to look at as they drove by on Schaefer Road. Religious communities in the area also struggled to provide comfort and meaning in the face of such inexplicable violence. Local churches organized prayer services and support groups, but many faith leaders admitted that they had no easy answers for parishioners who were questioning how such evil could exist in their peaceful community. The broader conversation about family violence and murder-suicide gained renewed attention following the Hunt case. Mental health professionals noted that while such extreme violence within families is relatively rare, it often occurs without obvious warning signs. The apparent normalcy of the Hunt family in the days and weeks before the shooting highlighted how difficult it can be to predict and prevent such tragedies. Media coverage of the case began to fade after several weeks, but for the residents of North Sewickley Township, the impact would last much longer. Community members organized ongoing support networks for each other, recognizing that healing from such a traumatic event would take time and collective effort. The case also prompted discussions about how small communities can better prepare for and respond to major traumatic events. North Sewickley Township had little experience dealing with violent crime, and the Hunt family massacre exposed gaps in resources and support systems that had never been needed before. Local businesses and organizations began working together to create a stronger support network for residents who might be struggling with mental health issues, family problems, or other challenges. While these efforts could not bring back the Hunt family, community leaders hoped they might help prevent future tragedies, or at least provide better support for families in crisis. The seasonal cycles of rural life continued around the empty Hunt property, but the rhythm felt different now. Spring planting, summer growing seasons, and fall harvests would all occur without the family who had been such an integral part of the agricultural community. Neighbors who had shared farming tips, borrowed equipment, and helped each other during busy seasons now faced the reality that the Hunts would never again be part of these traditional community activities. As investigators continued their work and the community began the long process of healing, one thing remained clear. The Hunt family massacre had fundamentally changed North Sewickley Township. The innocence and sense of security that had characterized this small rural community had been shattered, leaving residents to rebuild their sense of safety and community in the wake of an unthinkable tragedy. The case serves as a sobering reminder that family violence can occur anywhere, affecting people who seem to have everything going for them. Despite the love of community, strong family bonds, shared interests, and positive future plans that characterized the Hunt family, something went catastrophically wrong on that January evening. Understanding why remains one of the most challenging questions for investigators, mental health professionals, and community members who are still trying to make sense of losing 4 people they cared about in such a violent and unexpected way. Years from now, when people in North Sewickley Township think about the Hunt family, they will likely remember Michelle's bright smile at the Aviation Museum, Cody's dreams of becoming an Air Force pilot, Clifford Sr.'s dedication to his family, and the love they all shared for their animals and their community. However, they will also remember the night when everything changed, when a peaceful Sunday evening became the scene of one of Pennsylvania's most heartbreaking family tragedies. The memorial scholarship in Cody's name will help future students pursue their aviation dreams. The memorial at the Air Heritage Museum will ensure that Michelle and Cody's contributions are never forgotten. The animals they loved have found new homes where they are cared for by people who understand how much they meant to the Hunt family. These positive legacies provide some comfort to a community that will always carry the weight of this tragedy. But perhaps the most important long-term impact of the Hunt family massacre is the reminder it provides about the importance of community support, mental health awareness, and the need to check on each other regularly. While no one could have predicted or prevented what happened to the Hunt family, their loss has motivated their community to be more attentive to signs that families might be struggling and more proactive about offering help before problems escalate to crisis levels. The investigation may eventually close, the media attention will fade completely, and life in North Sewickley Township will gradually return to a new normal. However, the impact of losing 4 beloved community members in such a violent way will continue to shape this small town for generations to come, serving as both a tragedy to mourn and a catalyst for building stronger, more supportive community bonds that honor the memory of the Hunt family. On the 12th of January 2025, the Hunt family of North Sewickley Township, Pennsylvania, became victims of a devastating murder-suicide that shocked their tight-knit rural community. Police responded to a 911 call around 8:30 p.m. and found parents Clifford Hunt, Sr., 51, and Michelle Hunt, 48, dead from gunshot wounds to the head. Their 2 sons, one 9-year-old Clifford Jr. and one 6-year-old Cody, were found critically injured and later died at a Pittsburgh hospital. Investigators determined that Clifford Jr. had shot his parents and younger brother before turning the gun on himself. The family were well known in their community as avid hunters and animal lovers, with Michelle and Cody volunteering at the local Air Heritage Aviation Museum, where they shared their passion for aviation. Cody was an honor student who dreamed of becoming an Air Force pilot, while Michelle was beloved for her volunteer work and care for farm animals. Despite appearing to be a happy, normal family with no known problems, authorities found no clear motive for the violence. The tragedy devastated the small community, prompting an outpouring of support, including a GoFundMe that raised over $40,000 for funeral costs and arrangements for the care of the family's animals. The case remains under investigation as the community struggles to understand how such violence could occur in a family that seemed to have everything going for them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the Amite, Louisiana home massacre. On a Thursday afternoon in January 2025, a quiet home on Sawmill Road in Almaty, Louisiana, became the scene of a heartbreaking family tragedy. 3 people died in a brutal stabbing attack that shocked the small community and highlighted the serious problems with mental health care in Louisiana. The victims included a loving mother, her young son, and a baby who had barely begun to experience life. Almaty sits in St. Helena Parish, Louisiana, a rural area where families often live close together and help each other through difficult times. This is the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors and people look out for each other. The community is tight-knit, and violent crime is rare, making what happened on the 9th of January 2025 even more shocking for residents. At the center of this tragedy was the Powell family, who had been dealing with a serious ongoing challenge that many families across America face every day. Ryant Jones, 31, was one of 6 siblings in a family that had been struggling with his mental health issues for years. Jones had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a serious mental illness that affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. When someone has schizophrenia, they might hear voices that are not there, have trouble thinking clearly, or believe things that are not true. Jones had been living with his sister, 40-year-old Rhonda Powell, along with his 1-year-old son, Hayden Madison. Rhonda was not just his sister, she was his caregiver, his support system, and the person who helped him navigate his daily challenges. She had opened her home to both Jones and baby Hayden, creating a safe space where the family could stay together and support each other. Rhonda Powell was described by family members as a caring and loving woman who always put her family first. She was raising her own 10-year-old son, Braylon Powell, while also caring for her brother and his baby. Braylon was a typical 10-year-old boy who was just starting to discover the world around him. He had his whole life ahead of him and was loved deeply by his mother and extended family. Baby Hayden Madison was only 1 year old, still learning to walk and beginning to say his first words. He was Jones's son, which made the situation even more heartbreaking. Hayden depended completely on the adults around him for love, care, and protection. Like all babies, he brought joy to his family and represented hope for the future. The family had been dealing with Jones's mental health challenges for a long time. His cousin, Deandra Robertson Warner, later explained that the family had experience with Jones's condition and knew how to help him when he was having difficulties. Usually, when Jones started having symptoms like hearing voices, the family would take him to a medical facility where he would receive a shot that helped stabilize his condition. His mother typically was the person who handled these medical situations, but she was currently in the hospital herself, waiting for heart surgery. The mental health care system in Louisiana, like in many states across America, has serious problems. There are not enough beds in hospitals for people who need mental health treatment. Doctors and nurses who work in emergency rooms often do not have proper training to deal with people who are having mental health crises. Insurance companies sometimes refuse to pay for the treatment that people need. All of these problems came together in the worst possible way for the Jones family. In the days leading up to January 9, Jones had been showing signs that his mental health was getting worse. Family members who knew him well could see that he was struggling. They had been through this before and knew that he needed professional medical help. However, getting that help would prove to be much more difficult than anyone expected. The family lived in a state where mental health resources are limited and often difficult to access. Louisiana ranks near the bottom of all states when it comes to mental health care. There are long waiting lists for treatment, not enough doctors who specialize in mental health, and many insurance plans that do not cover the full cost of mental health treatment. For families like the Joneses, getting help for a loved one who is having a mental health crisis can feel like fighting an impossible battle. Build up. On Wednesday, the 8th of January 2025, Jones began telling his family that he was hearing voices. For people who have schizophrenia, hearing voices is a common symptom that can be very frightening and confusing. The voices might tell the person to do things, or they might say mean or scary things. Jones's family knew that when he started hearing voices, it meant his condition was getting worse and he needed medical help right away. The family immediately recognized this as a warning sign. They had been through similar situations before and knew that quick action was necessary. Jones's sister Rhonda and other family members made the decision to take him to a medical center to get treatment. This was not their first time dealing with this kind of emergency, and they hoped that the medical professionals would be able to help Jones like they had in the past. When they arrived at the medical facility, the family explained to the doctors and nurses that Jones had schizophrenia and was having an episode. They told the medical staff about his history and explained that he usually received a particular type of medication that helped him. The family was hopeful that Jones would get the treatment he needed and be able to return home in a stable condition. However, things did not go as the family expected. Instead of giving Jones the injection that usually worked for him, the medical staff decided to give him pills instead. This change in medication was concerning to the family, who knew that the shot had been effective in the past. Robertson Warner later said that the family pleaded with or implored the doctor to give him the shot that usually works. Even more concerning was the fact that the family asked the medical staff to keep Jones at the hospital for observation and treatment. They explained to the doctors that he was showing signs of aggression and that they were worried about what might happen if he was sent home too soon. The family requested that they commit him and that they keep him because he was showing signs of aggression, Robertson Warner told reporters. Despite the family's concerns and requests, the medical facility refused to admit Jones for longer-term treatment. The doctors decided to give him the new medication and send him home with his family. This decision would later be seen as a critical failure in the mental health care system. The family knew Jones better than anyone and could see that he was not ready to go home, but their concerns were not taken seriously by the medical professionals. The family left the medical facility feeling frustrated and worried. They had done everything they could think of to get help for Jones, but the system had failed them. They took Jones home, hoping that the new medication would work and that he would start to feel better. However, they remained concerned about his condition and kept a close watch on him. Back at the home on Sawmill Road, the family tried to create a calm and supportive environment for Jones. Rhonda continued to care for her brother, her son Braylon, and baby Hayden. She was doing her best to manage a very difficult situation while also dealing with the stress of knowing that her brother was not doing well mentally. Throughout Wednesday evening and into Thursday morning, Jones's condition did not seem to improve. The new medication did not appear to be helping him the way the family had hoped. Family members later said that Jones seemed confused and was acting strangely. He told family members that he had been given the wrong medicine, which increased their concerns about his mental state. The timing of this crisis was particularly difficult for the family because Jones's mother, who usually handled these medical emergencies, was not available to help. She was in the intensive care unit at a hospital, preparing for heart surgery. The person who typically knew best how to help Jones through his mental health crises was unable to be there when he needed her most. Thursday, January 9, started like any other day, but the family remained worried about Jones's condition. They continued to monitor him closely and hoped that he would start to feel better as the day progressed. Rhonda went about her usual routine of caring for the children and managing the household, while keeping an eye on her brother. As the afternoon approached, there were no obvious signs that violence was about to occur. The family was dealing with a mental health crisis, but they had no reason to believe that anyone was in physical danger. They had been through similar situations before, and while they were concerned, they did not expect that Jones would become violent toward his family members. Around 4:30 p.m., something went terribly wrong inside the home on Sawmill Road. What exactly triggered the violence remains unclear, but Jones apparently attacked the 3 people who loved him most and had been trying to help him. The mental health episode that the family had been trying to manage suddenly turned into a deadly situation that no one could have predicted. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 9th of January 2025, emergency dispatchers received a call about a domestic disturbance at a home in the 1500 block of Sawmill Road in Amite. The caller reported that something was wrong at the residence, but the details were unclear. Deputies from the street, Helena Parish Sheriff's Office immediately responded to the scene, not knowing what they would find when they arrived. When the first officers reached the home, they discovered a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside the house, they found 3 people who had been brutally stabbed to death. The victims were 40-year-old Rhonda Powell, her 10-year-old son Braylon Powell, and her 1-year-old nephew Hayden Madison. All 3 had suffered fatal stab wounds and were pronounced dead at the scene. The officers also found the person responsible for the attack. Ryant Jones, 31, was still inside the home when deputies arrived. According to family members who spoke to reporters later, Jones was found in a daze and was telling people that he had been given the wrong medicine. He did not resist arrest and was taken into custody without incident. The scene inside the home was devastating for the responding officers. They had discovered that an entire family had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. A mother who had been trying to help her brother was dead. A 10-year-old boy, who should have been playing and learning, was dead. A baby, who had barely begun to experience life, was dead. The person responsible was a family member who was supposed to love and protect them. Sheriff Clay Chutz later described the incident as a horrible tragedy and said that his thoughts and prayers went out to the victims' families, the first responders who worked the scene, and the entire community. The sheriff's office confirmed that all 3 victims were dead when deputies arrived, and that there was no ongoing threat to the community. The investigation began immediately, with detectives working to understand exactly what had happened inside the home. The physical evidence showed that the victims had been stabbed multiple times, and that the attack had been brutal and deadly. Jones was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, one of the most serious charges possible under Louisiana law. The relationship between the attacker and the victims made the crime even more heartbreaking. Jones had killed his own sister, who had been caring for him and trying to help him through his mental health crisis. He had killed his own 1-year-old son, a baby who depended on him for love and protection. He had killed his 10-year-old nephew, a child who was part of his extended family. Family members later tried to help the community understand what had happened. They explained that Jones had been suffering from a severe mental health episode and that the attack occurred during a time when he was not thinking clearly. Robertson Warner told reporters that the family considered Jones to be a 4th victim in this tragedy, saying, "It has been horrific and 100% avoidable if we would have gotten adequate health care." The weapons used in the attack were apparently kitchen knives or other sharp objects that were readily available in the home. The investigation showed that Jones had used these everyday items to carry out the brutal attack on his family members. The fact that the weapons were common household objects highlighted how quickly a domestic situation can turn deadly when someone is experiencing a severe mental health crisis. Neighbors in the area were shocked when they learned what had happened. The home on Sawmill Road was in a quiet residential area where violent crime was rare. People who lived nearby said they had no idea that anything was wrong until they saw the police cars and ambulances arriving at the scene. The attack happened so quickly that no one outside the home had any opportunity to intervene or get help. The emergency response was swift and professional, but there was nothing that the deputies or medical personnel could do to save the victims. By the time help arrived, Rhonda, Braylon, and baby Hayden were already dead. The attack had been so sudden and violent that the victims had no chance to defend themselves or escape. The investigation revealed that there had been no ongoing domestic violence in the home prior to the attack. This was not a situation where there had been escalating arguments or threats. Instead, it appeared to be a case where someone who was experiencing a severe mental health crisis suddenly became violent toward the people who were trying to help him. Jones's mental state at the time of the attack became a crucial part of the investigation. Family members explained to investigators that he had been hearing voices and acting strangely in the days leading up to the violence. They described how they had tried to get him medical help just 1 day before the attack, but had been unsuccessful in getting him the treatment they believed he needed. The timing of the attack, less than 24 hours after Jones had been released from the medical facility, raised serious questions about the mental health care system's response to his crisis. The family had specifically asked for Jones to be kept at the hospital because they were concerned about his mental state, but their requests had been denied. The news of the triple homicide spread quickly through the small community of Emite and the surrounding areas. In a rural area, where everyone knows everyone, word traveled fast that something terrible had happened to a local family. The initial reports were shocking and difficult for residents to comprehend. Deandra Robertson Warner, who was Rhonda Powell's cousin, became the family spokesperson in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. She was devastated by the loss of her cousin and the 2 children, but she also wanted to help people understand what had happened and why. Warner immediately began speaking to reporters about the family's struggles with the mental health care system. "I understand God will never give us more than we can bear, but this is rough," Warner told reporters in the days following the attack. She explained that her entire life had changed in the span of just 24 hours, and that the family was struggling to process what had happened. Warner set up a GoFundMe page to help cover the costs of 3 funerals and to support the family during this difficult time. On the fundraising page, she explained the relationships between the victims and the attacker. She confirmed that Braylon was Rhonda's son, that Hayden was her nephew, and that Jones was a family member who had been living with Rhonda. The GoFundMe page also provided important context about Jones's mental health struggles. Warner explained that Jones had a documented history of schizophrenia and that at the time of the attack, he was experiencing a mental health episode. She made it clear that the family did not see Jones as a monster, but rather as someone who was sick and had not received the help he needed. The Street Helena Parish Sheriff's Office worked quickly to assure the community that there was no ongoing threat to public safety. They confirmed that Jones was in custody and that the investigation was ongoing. However, they also acknowledged that this was one of the most difficult cases they had ever handled. Local residents struggled to understand how such violence could occur in their peaceful community. Many people knew the Powell family and were shocked to learn about the tragedy. Neighbors described Rhonda as a caring mother and sister who was always willing to help others. They remembered Braylon as a happy child who loved to play and spend time with his friends. The mental health aspect of the case immediately became a focus of community discussions. Many residents began talking about the challenges that families face when trying to get help for loved ones who are struggling with mental illness. The fact that Jones's family had tried to get him help just one day before the attack highlighted the serious problems with the mental health care system. Religious leaders in the community organized prayer services and offered support to anyone who was struggling to process the tragedy. Local churches opened their doors to provide a place for people to come together and grieve. The pastors and counselors emphasized that mental illness is a medical condition, not a moral failing, and that families who are dealing with these challenges need support and understanding. The school system in the area also had to respond to the tragedy, as Braylon had been a student in the local schools. Counselors were made available to help children and staff who were having difficulty processing the loss of their classmate. Teachers and administrators worked to create a supportive environment where students could express their feelings and ask questions about what had happened. The broader community began organizing efforts to support the surviving family members. Local businesses donated money and services to help cover the costs of the funerals. Restaurants provided meals for family members who were too grief-stricken to cook. Churches and community organizations collected donations to help the family with their immediate needs. Law enforcement officers who responded to the scene also needed support in the aftermath of the tragedy. Seeing the bodies of 3 family members, including a baby and a child, was traumatic for the deputies and other first responders. The sheriff's office provided counseling services and encouraged officers to seek help if they were struggling with what they had witnessed. The case immediately attracted media attention from across Louisiana and beyond. Reporters arrived in Amite to cover the story and interview family members and community leaders. The media coverage helped raise awareness about the challenges facing families who are dealing with mental health crises, but it also added stress for a community that was trying to grieve and heal. Jones was booked into the St. Helena Parish Jail on 3 counts of first-degree murder. In Louisiana, first-degree murder is a capital offense, which means that Jones could potentially face the death penalty if he is convicted. However, his mental health condition would likely be a major factor in any legal proceedings. The family made it clear that they wanted Jones to receive proper mental health treatment, regardless of what happened in the legal system. They emphasized that they believed there were 4 victims in this case: Rhonda, Braylon, Hayden, and Jones himself. They argued that if the mental health system had worked properly, all 4 of these people would still be alive. The Amite family massacre had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the immediate tragedy. The case became a catalyst for discussions about mental health care reform in Louisiana and highlighted the serious gaps in the state's treatment system for people with severe mental illness. Robertson Warner became an advocate for mental health care reform in the aftermath of losing her family members. She spoke publicly about the need for better training for emergency room staff, more hospital beds for people experiencing mental health crises, and improved insurance coverage for mental health treatment. Her advocacy efforts helped bring attention to the systematic problems that had contributed to the tragedy. The case highlighted several critical failures in Louisiana's mental health care system. First, the emergency room staff who treated Jones on January 8 did not appear to have adequate training in dealing with patients experiencing psychotic episodes. They made the decision to change his medication without fully understanding his medical history or the potential consequences of that change. Second, the hospital's refusal to admit Jones for inpatient treatment, despite his family's specific requests and concerns about his aggressive behavior, demonstrated a lack of available beds and resources for people experiencing mental health crises. Louisiana, like many states, has closed numerous mental health facilities over the years due to budget cuts, leaving families with few options when their loved ones need intensive treatment. Third, the case exposed problems with communication and coordination between different parts of the healthcare system. The fact that Jones's regular treatment provider was not involved in his care on January 8 meant that the emergency room staff did not have access to important information about what treatments had been effective for him in the past. The legal proceedings in Jones's case became complicated due to his mental health condition. Defense attorneys would likely argue that Jones was not mentally competent at the time of the attacks and should not be held fully responsible for his actions. Prosecutors would have to balance the need for justice for the victims with the reality that Jones was suffering from a severe mental illness. The case also raised difficult questions about family responsibility and the limits of what relatives can do to help loved ones with mental illness. Rhonda Powell had done everything she could to support her brother, including providing him with a home and helping him access medical care. However, the system failed to provide the level of support that Jones needed, and Rhonda paid the ultimate price for trying to help. The tragedy had a lasting impact on the broader Amite community. Residents who had previously felt safe in their rural environment began to worry about the potential for violence from people experiencing mental health crises. Some community members called for better screening and monitoring of people with severe mental illness, while others emphasized the need for more support and resources rather than increased surveillance. Local law enforcement agencies began reviewing their protocols for responding to mental health emergencies. The St. Helena Parish Sheriff's Office and other departments in the area started providing additional training for deputies on how to recognize and respond to situations involving people with mental illness. This training emphasized de-escalation techniques and the importance of getting mental health professionals involved in crisis situations. The mental health advocacy community in Louisiana used the case to push for legislative changes that would improve access to treatment and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Advocates called for increased funding for mental health services, mandatory training for emergency room staff, and laws that would make it easier for families to get help for loved ones who are experiencing mental health crises. The case also contributed to national discussions about the relationship between mental illness and violence. While the vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent, cases like the Amite massacre feed into public fears and misconceptions about mental health conditions. Mental health advocates work to emphasize that proper treatment and support can prevent most people with mental illness from becoming violent. The economic impact of the case extended beyond the immediate costs of the investigation and prosecution. The community had to deal with the emotional and psychological costs of the tragedy, including increased demand for mental health services and counseling. The loss of 3 productive community members also represented a significant loss of human potential and contribution. The GoFundMe campaign, organized by Robertson Warner, ultimately raised thousands of dollars to help cover funeral costs and support the surviving family members. The success of the fundraising effort demonstrated the community's commitment to supporting each other during difficult times, but it also highlighted the financial burden that families face when dealing with mental health tragedies. The case prompted reviews of policies and procedures at hospitals and mental health facilities throughout Louisiana. Medical administrators began examining their protocols for handling patients with severe mental illness and looking for ways to improve communication with families who are seeking help for their loved ones. Educational institutions in the area also began incorporating mental health awareness into their curricula. Schools started teaching students about the signs and symptoms of mental illness and how to get help for themselves or others who might be struggling. These educational efforts were designed to reduce stigma and encourage people to seek treatment before their conditions become severe. The long-term impact on Jones himself remained unclear as the case moved through the legal system. If he received proper mental health treatment while in custody, there was a possibility that his condition could be stabilized with medication and therapy. However, the trauma of having killed his own family members would likely require intensive psychological treatment for years to come. The case also highlighted the intergenerational impact of mental health crises. Baby Hayden's death meant that an entire line of the family's future was cut short. Braylon's death meant the loss of a child who could have grown up to make positive contributions to his community. These losses would be felt by the family and community for generations to come. Mental health professionals who studied the case pointed to several lessons that could help prevent similar tragedies in the future. They emphasized the importance of family input in treatment decisions, the need for consistent medication management, and the critical importance of having adequate inpatient treatment options available for people experiencing severe mental health crises. The case became part of the ongoing national conversation about how society should respond to people with severe mental illness. Some people argued for increased involuntary commitment laws that would make it easier to hospitalize people against their will. Others emphasized the need for better voluntary treatment options and support services that would help people before their conditions become severe. The Amite massacre serves as a tragic reminder of what can happen when the mental health care system fails families who are desperately seeking help. The loss of Rhonda Powell, Braylon Powell, and baby Hayden Madison represents not just a personal tragedy for their family, but a systemic failure that cost 3 innocent lives and destroyed what remained of a family that had been trying to support each other through difficult times. The case continues to influence policy discussions and advocacy efforts aimed at improving mental health care in Louisiana and across the United States. While no changes to the system can bring back the victims, their deaths may ultimately help prevent similar tragedies by highlighting the urgent need for comprehensive mental health care reform. For the surviving family members, the healing process will take years and may never be complete. They must live with the knowledge that their loved ones died at the hands of someone they had been trying to help, and that better mental health care might have prevented the entire tragedy. Their ongoing advocacy work represents a way to honor the memory of the victims while working to ensure that other families do not have to endure similar losses. The empty spaces left by Rhonda, Braylon, and Hayden will never be filled, but their deaths have sparked important conversations about mental health care that could ultimately save other lives. The challenge now is to translate the awareness raised by this tragedy into concrete policy changes and improved services that will better support families dealing with mental health crises. The Amite case demonstrates that mental illness affects entire families and communities, not just the individuals who are diagnosed with these conditions. It shows the importance of having robust support systems in place and the devastating consequences when those systems fail. Most importantly, it reminds us that behind every mental health statistic are real people with real families who deserve access to the care and support they need to stay safe and healthy. On the 9th of January 2025, a devastating family massacre occurred in Amite, Louisiana, when 1-year-old Ryant Jones stabbed 3 family members to death during a severe mental health episode. The victims were his sister, Rhonda Powell, 40, who had been caring for him, her 10-year-old son, Braylon Powell, and Jones's own 1-year-old son, Hayden Madison. Jones, who had a documented history of schizophrenia, had been taken to a medical facility by concerned family members just 1 day before the attack, after he began hearing voices. Despite the family's pleas for the hospital to admit him for treatment due to his aggressive behavior, medical staff gave him different medication than usual and released him home. Less than 24 hours later, Jones attacked his family members with kitchen knives while experiencing what relatives described as a psychotic episode. Family spokesperson Deandra Robertson Warner called the tragedy 100% avoidable if we would have gotten adequate health care and established a GoFundMe to cover funeral costs while advocating for mental health care reform. Jones was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, but the family considers him a 4th victim of Louisiana's failing mental health system. The case highlighted critical gaps in mental health care, including inadequate emergency room training, lack of hospital beds for psychiatric patients, and poor coordination between healthcare providers, sparking broader discussions about mental health care reform in Louisiana. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Death of Fatmeh Soltani, Iran. Death of Fatmeh Soltani, Iran, a father killing his daughter. On the 16th of April 2025, 7-year-old Fatmeh Soltani was brutally murdered by her own father on a busy street in Islamshahar, Tehran province, Iran. In broad daylight and in full view of horrified passers-by, her father stabbed her 14 times before partially severing her throat, ending the life of a young woman who had been desperately trying to escape years of domestic violence and build an independent life for herself. Islamshahar is a city in Tehran province, Iran, where traditional family values often clash with modern aspirations, especially for young women. For many Iranian girls, the journey to adulthood involves navigating complex family expectations while trying to create their own path in life. Fatmeh Soltani's story represents the tragic extreme of what can happen when these worlds collide. Fatmeh was born on the 11th of December 2007 into a family that would be marked by violence and fear from her earliest memories. Her father, Kanali Soltani, was a 8-year-old man who ruled his household through intimidation, threats, and physical abuse. He was a man who believed that his wife and children existed solely to serve his needs and follow his commands, regardless of how unreasonable or cruel those demands might be. The Soltani household was a place where domestic violence was not an occasional outburst but a constant presence. Fatmeh's brother, Amir Mohammed Soltani, later recalled that his first memory of his father's violence occurred when he was just 7 years old. He had come home from school to find the house empty because his father had beaten their mother so severely that she had fled the home in fear and pain. Fatmeh's mother was described by her son as an exceptional woman who had endured years of abuse while trying to protect her children and keep the family together. She worked hard to support the family financially, while her husband spent money on his own entertainment and extramarital affairs. The mother's strength and resilience became a model for Fatmeh, who would later follow in her footsteps by seeking financial independence through her own work. As Fatmeh and her brother grew older, they began to understand that their father's behavior was wrong and dangerous. They started to defend their mother when Kanali became violent, which only intensified his hatred toward his children. In his mind, their defiance was a challenge to his authority that could not be tolerated. A particularly vicious assault in 2015 left half of their mother's face permanently damaged, yet somehow Kanali convinced her to return to the household through what Amir Muhammad described as fear, pleading, begging, and promises. The family's attempts to escape Connolly's violence were repeatedly thwarted by a combination of his threats, their economic dependence, and a legal system that offered little protection for victims of domestic violence. They had reported his abuse to authorities numerous times over the years, but help rarely came, and when it did, it was often too little and too late to make a meaningful difference. Fatma grew up in this environment of constant fear and tension, never knowing when her father might explode into violence. Despite these terrible circumstances, she managed to develop her own dreams and ambitions. She was particularly interested in beauty and nail care, skills that would eventually allow her to earn money and begin building the independence that her father found so threatening. As Fatma became a teenager, she started working professionally in beauty salons, learning the skills that would eventually allow her to support herself. For nearly 3 years, she built up her expertise and clientele, creating a small business that gave her both financial independence and a sense of purpose. However, she had to keep her work secret from her father, knowing that he would view her independence as a threat to his control over the family. The situation at home continued to deteriorate as Fatma and her brother became more protective of their mother and more resistant to their father's abuse. Connolly could sense that he was losing control over his family, and this loss of power made him increasingly angry and unpredictable. The children who had once been helpless victims of his rage were now young adults who could fight back, and he found this shift in family dynamics intolerable. Fatma's fear of her father was so intense that her brother often accompanied her to and from work, either driving her on his motorcycle or waiting nearby until she finished so they could travel home together safely. She had recently changed salon locations, specifically to avoid harassment from her father, and she had gone to great lengths to keep her new workplace address hidden from him. The family had been living at an uncle's house for a while after Connolly had thrown them out following a particularly violent confrontation. Even when separated from them, he continued to find ways to terrorize and control them. He had previously burned a SIM card that he had bought for Fatma, forcing her to get a new phone number in her mother's name. She used this number for business appointments on her Instagram page, believing it would help keep her location secret from her father. What ultimately triggered Connolly's final act of violence was Fatma's discovery of his infidelity and her decision to tell her mother about it. According to Amir Mohammed, this betrayal of his secrets created a deep grudge in Connolly's mind. In his twisted logic, Fatma's honesty about his cheating was an unforgivable act of defiance that demanded the ultimate punishment. The broader context of Fatma's murder involves Iran's legal system, which offers inadequate protection for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. Under Iranian law, particularly Article 301 of the Islamic Penal Code, fathers who kill their children often face reduced sentences or may even be exempt from the death penalty because they are considered the guardian of blood, Vali Adam, of their victims. This legal framework essentially gives men permission to murder their family members with minimal consequences. Iran has one of the highest rates of femicide in the world, with government-affiliated newspapers reporting that at least 137 women and girls were killed by men close to them in 2024 alone. The problem has only gotten worse in recent years, as economic pressures, social restrictions, and the lack of legal protections create a perfect storm of violence against women. In the days leading up to the 16th of April 2025, Fatma had been working at a new beauty salon location that she hoped her father would never discover. She had carefully hidden the address from him and had been using the phone number registered in her mother's name to avoid detection. Her Instagram page advertised her nail and beauty services, and she had been building a steady clientele of women who appreciated her skills and professionalism. On the morning of April 16, Fatma received what appeared to be a routine booking call. A woman contacted her through the number listed on her Instagram page, saying that she needed to travel and wanted to come to the salon that morning for services. This type of call was completely normal for Fatma's business, and she had no reason to be suspicious. What Fatma did not know was that the caller was actually her father, Connolly, who had disguised his voice to sound like a female client. He had been searching for ways to locate her new workplace and had finally found her business Instagram page with the phone number. By pretending to be a customer, he was able to trick Fatma into giving him the exact address of the salon where she worked. The deception was particularly cruel because it exploited Fatma's dedication to her work and her desire to serve her clients professionally. She had worked hard to build her reputation as a reliable and skilled beauty technician, and she would never have refused what seemed like a legitimate appointment, even on short notice. After obtaining the salon address through this deception, Connolly began planning his attack. According to later reports, he traveled to the salon location and positioned himself where he could observe the building and confirm that Fatma was indeed working there. The fact that he was able to locate her so easily, despite her efforts to hide her workplace address, demonstrates how difficult it can be for victims of domestic violence to truly escape their abusers. Throughout this period, Fatma continued her normal routine, unaware that her father had discovered her location. She arrived at work that morning, expecting a typical day of serving clients and earning money for her growing independence. Her brother Amir Mohammed had often worried about her safety and had frequently accompanied her to work, but on this particular morning, he was not with her. The salon where Fatma worked was located on 20 Meter Street in Islamshire, in a busy commercial area where people regularly walked and drove by throughout the day. It was the kind of public location where most people would assume they were safe from violence, especially during daylight hours. The fact that Connolly was willing to carry out his attack in such a public setting demonstrates the intensity of his rage and his complete disregard for the consequences of his actions. Around 9 a.m., Connolly arrived at the salon. According to eyewitness accounts and CCTV footage that was later reviewed by authorities, he initially tried to convince Fatma to get into his car with him. This suggests that he may have originally planned to take her to a more secluded location before carrying out the attack. However, when Fatma realized who the caller had really been and understood the danger she was in, she immediately called her mother for help. "Dad is here. He found the salon," were among the last words Fatma ever spoke, frantically whispered to her mother over the phone as she realized that her worst nightmare was about to come true. The terror in her voice was captured in that brief phone call, a final desperate plea for help that came too late to save her life. Amir Mohammed, who overheard his sister's panicked call to their mother, immediately jumped on his motorcycle and raced through the streets of Islamshire, desperately trying to reach the salon before something terrible happened. His father had called him earlier that morning with the ominous words, "I've left you with grief," but Amir Mohammed had thought this was just another psychological torment, not a promise of murder. As Amir Mohammed raced through the city streets, Fatma was facing the final moments of her life. When she refused to get into her father's car, Connolly's anger exploded into lethal violence. He had come prepared with a knife, indicating that he had planned this attack in advance rather than acting in a moment of sudden rage. The attack occurred in full view of passers-by who initially thought they were witnessing a robbery or some other random crime. The idea that a father would murder his own daughter in broad daylight was so unthinkable that witnesses initially failed to understand what they were really seeing. Some people called the police, believing they were reporting a street crime, not realizing they were witnessing an honor killing. At approximately 9 a.m. on the 16th of April 2025, the quiet morning routine of 20 Meter Street in Islamshire was shattered by an act of violence so brutal and public that it would traumatize everyone who witnessed it. Connolly Soltani had finally cornered his daughter outside the beauty salon where she worked, and he was prepared to carry out the ultimate punishment for what he perceived as her unforgivable defiance. When Fatma realized that the mysterious client who had called that morning was actually her father, and when she saw him waiting outside the salon, she immediately understood that her life was in mortal danger. Her panicked phone call to her mother was a desperate attempt to get help, but there was no time for anyone to intervene. Connolly had spent days planning this moment, and he was not going to let his daughter escape again. According to eyewitness accounts and CCTV footage that captured the horrific attack, Connolly initially approached Fatma's car and demanded that she get inside with him. When she refused, understanding that going with him would likely mean death, he immediately escalated to violence. He stabbed her once while she was still in the vehicle, causing her to try to escape by getting out of the car. Fatma's attempt to flee triggered an even more vicious response from her father. As she got out of the car and tried to run away, Connolly deliberately struck her with the vehicle, knocking her to the ground and leaving her vulnerable to further attack. The use of the car as a weapon demonstrated the calculated nature of his violence and his determination to ensure that she could not escape. Once Fatma was on the ground, Connolly got out of his car and began the most brutal part of his attack. He grabbed his injured daughter and dragged her to a nearby water drainage ditch, where he proceeded to stab her repeatedly with a knife he had brought specifically for this purpose. Witnesses reported hearing his furious shouts as he attacked her, indicating that he was in a state of uncontrolled rage. The attack was witnessed by numerous people who were walking or driving by on the busy street. However, because the violence was so sudden and extreme, many witnesses initially thought they were seeing a robbery or random assault rather than a family-related crime. Some people called the police, but others were too shocked to react immediately to what they were witnessing. According to the official investigation, Connolly stabbed Fatma a total of 14 times with the knife. The wounds were concentrated on her torso and neck, indicating that he was trying to cause maximum damage and ensure that she would not survive the attack. Some reports also indicate that he partially severed her throat during the assault, which would have made it impossible for her to call for help, even if she had remained conscious. The CCTV footage from the salon's entrance captured the horrific details of the murder, showing Connolly dragging his daughter to the ground, kneeling over her, and stabbing her repeatedly. The footage was so disturbing that it became evidence in the case, while also serving as a stark reminder of the reality of honor killings in Iran. The fact that the attack was recorded provides undeniable evidence of what happened, leaving no room for the perpetrator to claim self-defense or accident. Throughout the attack, Fatma was completely defenseless against her father's violence. She was a 17-year-old girl who weighed much less than her 8-year-old father, and she had no weapons or means of protecting herself. The attack was entirely one-sided, with Connolly using his superior size and strength, as well as the element of surprise, to overpower his daughter completely. The entire attack lasted only a few minutes, but it was long enough for Connolly to inflict fatal wounds that would end Fatma's life. By the time Amir Mohammed arrived at the scene on his motorcycle, racing through the streets after overhearing his sister's desperate phone call, it was already too late. He found a crowd gathered around an ambulance, police tape blocking off the area, and his sister's body lying in the drainage ditch where their father had left her. "I hugged her." Amir Mohammed later recalled about the moment he found his sister. "I felt her move for a moment, and then everything was over." This brief description captures the heartbreaking reality of arriving just moments too late to save someone you love, and the devastating finality of witnessing their last breath. The immediate aftermath of the attack was chaotic, with police officers, emergency medical personnel, and shocked witnesses all trying to process what had just occurred. The brutality of the crime and its public nature made it particularly traumatic for everyone involved. Emergency responders who arrived at the scene found Fatma's body in the water ditch, her throat partially severed and her life draining away from the multiple stab wounds. Connolly made no attempt to flee the scene after completing his attack. Instead, he calmly turned himself in to the police, apparently believing that he had been justified in killing his daughter. This behavior is typical of perpetrators of honor killings, who often view their actions as restoring family honor rather than committing murder. They frequently surrender to authorities willingly because they believe society will understand and support their actions. When questioned by police, Connolly initially cited family problems and family disputes as his motive for killing Fatma. This vague explanation is commonly used by men who murder female family members in Iran, as it suggests that the victim was somehow responsible for creating the conflict that led to her death. However, family members later provided more specific details about what had actually motivated the attack. According to Amir Mohammed and other family members, the immediate trigger for Connolly's murderous rage was Fatma's recent discovery of his infidelity and her decision to tell their mother about it. Connolly had been having extramarital affairs while spending the family's money on his own entertainment, and when Fatma exposed his behavior, he developed what her brother described as a deep grudge against her. However, the real motive went much deeper than this single incident. Connolly had been losing control over his family as his children grew older and began to resist his abuse. Fatma's financial independence through her beauty business represented a direct challenge to his authority, as did her protective attitude toward her mother. In his mind, killing Fatma was a way to reassert his dominance and send a message to the rest of the family about the consequences of defying him. The police response to the attack was swift, with officers arriving at the scene within minutes of receiving the emergency calls from witnesses. However, as Amir Mohammed bitterly noted later, this rapid response stood in stark contrast to the delayed or absent responses the family had received over the years when they had called for help with domestic violence. When Fatma was being murdered, strangers called for help and police arrived quickly, but the family's previous pleas for protection had largely been ignored. The news of Fatma Soltani's brutal murder spread rapidly through social media and Persian-language news outlets, sparking immediate outrage and grief among women's rights activists and ordinary citizens who were horrified by the public nature of the attack. The fact that the murder had been captured on CCTV and had occurred in broad daylight on a busy street made it impossible for authorities to downplay or ignore the crime. Amir Mohammed Soltani, still traumatized by witnessing his sister's final moments, became the family's spokesperson in the immediate aftermath of the murder. Despite his grief and shock, he felt compelled to speak publicly about what had happened and to challenge the narrative that his father was trying to create. Rather than accepting Connolly's claims about family disputes, Amir Mohammed provided specific details about the years of abuse that had led to this tragic outcome. "We had been living at my uncle's house for a while," Amir Mohammed explained to reporters. "The person, whom I unfortunately have to call my father, had thrown us out after a big fight. It was around 9 a.m. when Fatma called my mother and said Dad was there. He had found the salon. His account provided crucial context about the family's attempts to escape Kanali's violence and the lengths to which Fatma had gone to try to build an independent life. The family's grief was compounded by their anger at a legal system that they knew would not provide justice for Fatma's murder. Under Article 301 of Iran's Islamic Penal Code, fathers who kill their children cannot face the death penalty because they are considered the guardian of blood of their victims. This meant that despite the brutal and premeditated nature of his crime, Kanali would face a maximum sentence of only 3 to 10 years in prison. "We want the maximum punishment. We want execution," Amir Mohammed pleaded in interviews with reporters. "This man will not be deterred. Even if imprisoned for 15 years, he will come out hoping for revenge against us." His words highlighted the family's fear that Kanali would continue to pose a threat to them even after serving his sentence, and their frustration with a legal system that seemed designed to protect perpetrators rather than victims. Women's rights activists immediately seized upon Fatma's case as an example of the systemic problems that enable honor killings in Iran. Organizations like Stop Femicide Iran and the Henga Organization for Human Rights began documenting the details of the case and using it to call for legal reforms. They emphasized that Fatma's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of violence against women that was enabled by discriminatory laws and cultural attitudes. The case quickly gained international attention, with news outlets around the world reporting on the brutal murder and the legal system that would protect Fatma's killer from facing proportional punishment. The Jerusalem Post, BBC Persian, and numerous other international media organizations covered the story, bringing global scrutiny to Iran's handling of domestic violence and honor killings. Social media played a crucial role in spreading awareness about Fatma's case, with hashtags related to her name trending on Persian-language platforms. Users shared her photo, details about the murder, and calls for justice, creating a digital memorial that also served as a form of activism. The widespread social media attention helped ensure that authorities could not simply ignore the case or allow it to disappear from public view. The Iranian government's response to the case was typical of its approach to domestic violence issues. State media reported on the murder, but framed it as an isolated incident involving family problems, rather than acknowledging it as part of a broader pattern of violence against women. Officials made no promises of legal reforms or increased protections for women, instead treating the case as a criminal matter that would be handled through existing legal channels. Local authorities in Islamshar were forced to address the public nature of the crime and its impact on the community. The fact that the murder had occurred on a busy street in broad daylight, witnessed by numerous people and captured on security cameras, made it impossible to handle the case quietly. Police had to reassure residents that the area was safe and that the crime was an isolated incident, even though many people were questioning how such violence could occur in their neighborhood. The beauty salon where Fatma had worked became an informal memorial site, with people leaving flowers and messages in her memory. Her co-workers and clients were traumatized by the loss of someone they had known as a skilled and dedicated professional who was always trying to improve her situation. Many of them had been unaware of the domestic violence she was facing at home, seeing only her professional demeanor and determination to succeed in her business. The broader Iranian women's rights community used Fatma's case to highlight the urgent need for legal reforms that would provide better protection for women and harsher punishments for perpetrators of gender-based violence. Activists pointed out that the current legal system essentially gives men permission to murder female family members with minimal consequences, creating a culture where such violence is normalized and even encouraged. International human rights organizations also responded to the case by calling for investigations into Iran's handling of domestic violence and femicide. The Women's Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran called on UN special rapporteurs to investigate the situation and to exclude Iranian regime representatives from international bodies until the country improved its treatment of women. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, Amir Mohammed faced additional trauma when he encountered his father at the police station. According to his account, Kanali attacked him even while in custody and threatened to kill his ex-wife, his son, and even his son's friends. This behavior demonstrated that despite having just murdered his daughter, Kanali remained violent and unrepentant about his actions. The case also had a devastating impact on Amir Mohammed's personal relationships. His girlfriend, who had been a friend of Fatma's, ended their relationship because she was too frightened to remain connected to a family that was being terrorized by such a violent man. This additional loss compounded the family's grief and isolation, showing how domestic violence affects not just immediate victims but entire networks of relationships. Media coverage of the case began to focus on the broader context of femicide in Iran, with reporters investigating statistics showing that violence against women was increasing rather than decreasing. Government-affiliated newspapers had reported that at least 137 women and girls were killed by men close to them in 2024, and activists argued that the real numbers were likely much higher due to underreporting and cover-ups. Fatma Sultani's murder became a catalyst for renewed discussions about women's rights and legal reform in Iran, both domestically and internationally. The case highlighted the brutal reality of honor killings and the legal system that enables them, sparking calls for fundamental changes to laws that treat women as property rather than human beings with the right to life and safety. The most significant long-term impact of the case was its contribution to growing pressure for the abolition of Article 301 of Iran's Islamic Penal Code. This provision, which exempts fathers and paternal grandfathers from facing the death penalty for killing their children, had long been criticized by human rights activists as a license for honor killings. Fatma's case provided a stark example of how this law operates in practice, with her father facing only 3 to 10 years in prison for brutally murdering his daughter in broad daylight. Legal experts and activists used the case to explain how discriminatory laws create a culture of impunity around violence against women. Under the concept of guardian of blood, valier dam, fathers are legally considered to have ownership over their children's lives, making it impossible for the state to impose the death penalty, even in cases of premeditated murder. This legal framework essentially treats women and children as property, rather than individuals with inherent rights. The international response to Fatma's case contributed to growing diplomatic pressure on Iran regarding its treatment of women. Human rights organizations documented the case as part of broader patterns of state-sanctioned violence against women, using it as evidence in reports to the United Nations and other international bodies. The case became part of the international community's broader criticism of Iran's human rights record, particularly regarding women's rights. Within Iran, the case contributed to growing feminist activism, despite the risks involved in challenging the government's policies. Women's rights activists used Fatma's story to illustrate the deadly consequences of patriarchal laws and social attitudes, organizing underground networks and online campaigns to raise awareness about domestic violence and honor killings. While open protest was dangerous, the case helped galvanize opposition to discriminatory laws and practices. The case also had a significant impact on discourse around domestic violence, prevention, and intervention. Amir Mohammad's detailed accounts of his family's repeated attempts to get help from authorities over the years highlighted the systematic failures that enable domestic violence to escalate to murder. His statement that, if the laws had been such that every time we went to court for violence and beatings, the law would have protected my mother and us, this wouldn't have happened, became a rallying cry for advocates seeking better protection systems. Mental health professionals and social workers used the case to advocate for better training and resources for dealing with domestic violence situations. The fact that the family had reported Kanali's abuse numerous times over the years, only to receive inadequate responses, demonstrated the need for more comprehensive approaches to protecting victims and holding perpetrators accountable. The case contributed to growing awareness of the economic factors that trap women in abusive relationships. Fatma's struggle to achieve financial independence through her beauty business and her father's rage at her success illustrated how economic dependence can be used as a tool of control and abuse. Her story became an example of why women need both legal protections and economic opportunities to escape violent situations. Educational institutions and advocacy organizations began using Fatma's case in awareness campaigns about honor killings and domestic violence. Her story was incorporated into educational materials designed to help people recognize the warning signs of escalating abuse and understand the resources available for helping victims. The case served as a tragic but powerful teaching tool about the realities of gender-based violence. The media coverage of Fatma's case also contributed to changing attitudes about honor killings among some segments of Iranian society. While traditional attitudes persisted in many areas, the brutal public nature of her murder and the widespread coverage it received helped some people understand that such violence was not about protecting family honor, but about controlling and punishing women for asserting their independence. International feminist organizations adopted Fatma's case as a symbol of the global struggle against honor killings and gender-based violence. Her story was told at conferences, in academic papers, and in advocacy campaigns around the world, helping to raise awareness about the specific ways that legal systems can enable violence against women. The case became part of broader international efforts to pressure countries to reform discriminatory laws. The case also had lasting effects on the Iranian women's rights movement's strategies and priorities. Activists realized that focusing solely on changing laws was insufficient if the broader cultural and social attitudes that support violence against women remained unchanged. Fatma's case highlighted the need for comprehensive approaches that address legal, social, economic, and cultural factors that contribute to gender-based violence. For Amir Mohammed and his mother, the long-term impact of Fatma's murder included ongoing trauma and the constant fear that Kanali might seek revenge when he was eventually released from prison. Their advocacy for justice in Fatma's case required them to relive the trauma repeatedly, while also facing potential retaliation from supporters of traditional patriarchal values, who viewed their public criticism as inappropriate. The case contributed to growing documentation of femicide patterns in Iran, with human rights organizations using it as part of larger databases tracking violence against women. This documentation work was crucial for building evidence-based arguments for legal and policy reforms, even though it was dangerous for the researchers and activists involved in collecting and analyzing the data. Fatma's murder also had implications for how domestic violence cases are handled by law enforcement and social services in Iran. While systematic changes were slow to occur, some local authorities began to take domestic violence reports more seriously, partly due to the negative publicity surrounding cases like Fatma's, where repeated warnings were ignored until it was too late. The case became part of broader discussions about the relationship between traditional religious interpretations and modern human rights principles. Islamic scholars and activists who supported women's rights used Fatma's case to argue that true religious values should protect women rather than enable violence against them, challenging more conservative interpretations that justified honor killings. Long-term advocacy efforts, inspired by Fatma's case, focused on changing the legal definition of honor killings to ensure they were treated as premeditated murders rather than crimes of passion or family disputes. Activists argued that the language used to describe such crimes influenced how they were prosecuted and punished, with terms like family disputes minimizing the severity of the violence and the need for harsh penalties. The international attention that Fatma's case received also contributed to growing pressure on Iranian authorities to provide better data and transparency about femicide and domestic violence. While the government remained resistant to acknowledging the full scope of the problem, the case made it more difficult for officials to dismiss concerns about violence against women as exaggerated or motivated by political opposition. The case influenced academic research on honor killings and domestic violence, with scholars using it as a case study to analyze the intersection of legal systems, cultural attitudes, and gender-based violence. Universities and research institutions incorporated Fatma's story into their curricula and research programs, helping to build a broader understanding of how honor killings function within larger systems of gender oppression. For the global Iranian diaspora, Fatma's case became a symbol of why they had left Iran and why they continued to oppose the current government. Iranian women living abroad organized memorial events and advocacy campaigns in her honor, using her story to raise awareness about the situation of women in Iran and to build support for regime change efforts. The case also contributed to growing support for Iranian women's rights among international policymakers and government officials. Legislators in various countries cited Fatma's case when introducing resolutions condemning Iran's treatment of women or when arguing for stronger sanctions against Iranian officials responsible for human rights violations. Ultimately, while Fatema Soltani's murder was a tragedy that destroyed a young life full of potential, her story became a powerful force for change that continued to influence discussions about women's rights, legal reform, and social justice long after her death. Her legacy lies not just in the grief and outrage her murder provoked, but in the ongoing efforts of activists, advocates, and ordinary citizens who refuse to let her death be in vain and who continue to fight for a world where no other young woman will face the same fate. On the 16th of April 2025, 17-year-old Fatema Soltani was brutally murdered by her father Kanali Soltani in broad daylight on a busy street in Eslamshar, Tehran province, Iran. Fatema had been secretly working at a beauty salon to achieve financial independence while trying to escape years of domestic violence from her abusive father. Kanali discovered her workplace by calling her business phone number on Instagram while pretending to be a female client seeking services. When he arrived at the salon around 9 a.m., Fatema realized the trap and frantically called her mother, saying, "Dad is here. He found the salon," among her last words. Kanali stabbed his daughter 14 times with a knife and partially severed her throat in full view of horrified passers-by before turning himself in to police. The murder was triggered by Fatema's recent discovery of her father's infidelity and her decision to tell her mother, which Kanali viewed as an unforgivable betrayal. Her brother Amir Muhammad arrived moments too late, finding his sister dying in a roadside drainage ditch. Under Iran's Islamic Penal Code Article 301, Kanali faces only 3 to 10 years in prison rather than the death penalty because fathers are considered guardians of blood over their children. The case sparked international outrage and became a symbol of Iran's honor-killing epidemic, with women's rights activists using Fatme's story to call for legal reforms and abolition of discriminatory laws that enable gender-based violence with minimal consequences for perpetrators. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And now, the final case we have here is the Nenmara double murder, Kerala, India. Nenmara double murder, Kerala, India. On the 27th of January 2025, a quiet morning in the village of Pathundi, near Nenmara, in Kerala's Palakkad district, was shattered by brutal violence when 8-year-old Chenthamara hacked to death his neighbors, 8-year-old Lakshmi, and her 50-year-old son Sudhakaran Chow in broad daylight outside their home. This horrific double murder was not a random act of violence, but the calculated completion of a revenge plan that had been years in the making, carried out by a man who had already murdered Sudhakaran's wife Sajitha in 2019 and was out on bail awaiting trial. The village of Pathundi in Kerala's Palakkad district is a small, close-knit community where everyone knows their neighbors and families have lived side by side for generations. It's the kind of place where violent crime is rare and shocking when it does occur. The lush green landscape and peaceful atmosphere make it seem like the last place where a brutal double murder would take place. Yet beneath the surface, a deadly feud had been brewing for years. At the center of this tragedy was Chenthamara, a 8-year-old man whose neighbors described as the psycho of our village. He was known for his moody and sullen temperament, his belief in black magic and evil spirits, and his tendency to make ominous threats about harming people. Even before the 2019 murder of Sajitha, Chenthamara had a criminal history that included being charged with culpable homicide at Palladam police station in Tamil Nadu's Tirupur district after he ran over a child with his truck. Chenthamara had originally moved to the Pathundi area after his love marriage to a woman named Vilasini. The couple initially settled in Nellikodu before moving to a small colony in Pathundi. However, their relationship deteriorated over time, and Vilasini eventually left him, taking their children with her. This abandonment became a source of deep resentment for Chenthamara, who began blaming his neighbors, particularly the women in the community, for his personal failures and family problems. The primary targets of Chenthamara's hatred were the family of Sudhakaran IS, a hardworking lorry driver who traveled to Tamil Nadu's Tirupur for work and returned home to Nenmara every weekend. Sudhakaran lived with his elderly mother Lakshmi in their family home in Pathundi. He had been married to Sajitha, and together they had 2 daughters, Akila, 19, who was studying as an undergraduate, and Athulya, 22, who had married the previous year and worked as a nurse at Palakkad District Cooperative Hospital. Chenthamara's twisted belief system centered around the idea that his neighbors, particularly the women, were practicing black magic against him and his family. He became convinced that Sajitha and other women in the community were responsible for his wife leaving him and for various other problems in his life. This paranoid thinking, combined with his already violent tendencies, created a dangerous situation that the local community was aware of, but seemingly powerless to prevent. The 2019 murder of Sajitha was Chenthamara's first act of deadly revenge. According to police investigations, he killed Sajitha after being influenced by what authorities described as a sorcerer who claimed that a long-haired woman was responsible for his family's misfortunes. On the 31st of August 2019, he brutally hacked Sajitha to death in Boyan Colony, Pathundi, using the same violent method that would later claim the lives of Sudhakaran and Lakshmi. After Sajitha's murder, Chenthamara was arrested and charged with her killing. However, due to the slow pace of India's judicial system, his trial had been delayed for years. He spent some time in Vizag jail but was eventually released on interim bail in late 2024, with his trial scheduled to begin in February 2025. The conditions of his bail specifically prohibited him from entering the Nenmara Panchayat area, but this restriction would prove to be inadequately enforced. Following Sajitha's death, the family dynamics in Sudhakaran's household changed significantly. Akila, fearing for her safety, moved in with her maternal grandparents in Kunisari, located about 15 kilometers from her father's house. She would only visit her father when she knew it was safe, avoiding the family home whenever there were reports of Chenthamara being in the area. About a year after Sajitha's murder, Sudhakaran remarried a woman named Gracie, who worked in Kerala's Idukki district. This new marriage represented hope for a fresh start for Sudakaran and his daughters. But it also served as another source of rage for Chentamara, who viewed it as evidence that the family was moving on with their lives while he remained consumed by his grievances. The local police had received multiple complaints about Chentamara over the years, both before and after Sajitha's murder. Residents described him as someone who would casually walk into shops carrying iron rods, make threatening statements about killing people, and generally create an atmosphere of fear in the community. His behavior was so concerning that villagers openly referred to him as psychologically disturbed and capable of horrific violence. Chentamara's belief in supernatural forces played a significant role in his violent behavior. Neighbors reported that he would frequently talk about black magic and claim that he was acting according to the directions of Chaithan, evil spirits. When people tried to reason with him or talk sense into him, he would dismiss their concerns and continue with his disturbing behavior and threats. The community's fear of Chentamara was well-founded, as he had a habit of openly discussing his violent intentions. According to neighbors, whenever he wanted to kill someone, he would tell everyone about it rather than keeping his plans secret. This pattern of behavior suggested that the violence was not just about eliminating specific targets, but also about terrorizing the entire community and maintaining a climate of fear. The failure of the legal and law enforcement systems to adequately protect the community from Chentamara became a crucial factor in the tragedy that was about to unfold. Despite multiple complaints, repeated violations of bail conditions, and clear threats against specific individuals, the authorities failed to take effective action to prevent further violence. In December 2024, approximately 2 months before the double murder, Chentamara was released on interim bail from Vayur jail. The timing of his release was particularly unfortunate, as his trial for Sajitha's murder was scheduled to begin in February 2025. This meant that he would be free in the community for several weeks before facing justice for his previous crime, creating a dangerous window of opportunity for further violence. One of the conditions of Chentamara's bail was that he was prohibited from entering the Nenmara Panchayat area where his victims lived. This restriction was designed to protect the community and ensure that he could not intimidate witnesses or threaten the victims' families. However, the enforcement of this condition would prove to be tragically inadequate, with police failing to monitor his compliance or take action when violations were reported. Against the terms of his bail, Chentamara quietly moved back into his house in Pothundi, which had been locked and empty for years while he was in jail. The house was located in the same small colony where Sudakaran and Lakshmi lived, putting him in close proximity to his intended victims. Local residents noticed his return but were shocked that he was being allowed to violate his bail conditions so openly. During his month-long stay in the house, Chentamara lived a solitary existence, cooking his own food and rarely allowing visitors inside. Neighbors observed him coming and going, but were afraid to directly confront him about his presence in the area. His return to the community created an immediate sense of unease among residents who remembered his previous threats and violent behavior. In December 2024, both Sudakaran and his daughter Akila filed formal complaints with the Nenmara police station, reporting that Chentamara had returned to the area in violation of his bail conditions and was making threats against their family. They specifically informed the police that they felt threatened by his presence and requested that action be taken to ensure their safety. The police response to these complaints was woefully inadequate. Instead of informing the court about Chentamara's bail violations or taking steps to have him rearrested, the officers merely gave him a verbal warning and told him to behave himself. This casual approach to enforcing court orders would later be identified as a critical failure that directly contributed to the deaths of Sudakaran and Lakshmi. Pushpa, who was a friend of the murdered Sajitha, also filed 3 separate complaints with the police about Chentamara's presence in the area. She reminded officers that he was not supposed to be in Nenmara Panchayat according to his bail conditions, but her concerns were repeatedly ignored. The police seemed reluctant to take any meaningful action against Chentamara, despite clear evidence that he was violating the terms of his release. During this period, Chentamara was working as a watchman at Matha Industries quarry in Kumbara, where his colleagues described him as a serious individual who often expressed disappointment about his family life. Mohandas, the manager of Matha Industries, later recalled that Chentamara frequently mentioned that his wife and daughter had cheated on him, displaying the kind of resentment and blame that had motivated his previous violence. Even more disturbing were the statements Chentamara made to his co-worker Manikandan, who received a phone as a gift when Chentamara left the job in early December 2024. Manikandan later told police that Chentamara had openly discussed his past, including being jailed for murder, and had specifically mentioned that he was planning to kill 2 more people. This direct threat made to a coworker just weeks before the murders, demonstrated that Chenthamara's violent intentions were not secret or impulsive but carefully planned. As January 2025 began, the situation became increasingly tense. Akila, who had been staying with her maternal grandparents for safety, was scheduled to meet her father Sudakaran on Monday, January 27. They had planned to go to the bank together to handle some financial matters. However, when Sudakaran had asked her to come home the previous Saturday evening, she refused because she was afraid of Chenthamara's presence in the neighborhood. Instead of going to the family home, Akila arranged to meet her father at the Nenmara bus stand on Monday morning. This decision to meet in a public place rather than at home would later save her life, as Chenthamara's attack occurred while Sudakaran was preparing to leave the house to meet his daughter. Throughout this period, Chenthamara was carefully observing the movements and routines of his intended victims. As a longtime resident of the area, he was familiar with the family's habits and knew when they were most vulnerable. Police would later describe him as a highly skilled criminal who had meticulously planned his attack and was able to evade capture for days afterward by using his detailed knowledge of the local terrain. The weapon Chenthamara chose for his attack was a billhook, a curved blade typically used for cutting vegetation, to which he had attached a stick to increase his reach and the force of his blows. This modification demonstrated the premeditated nature of his violence and his desire to ensure that his victims would not survive the attack. The weapon preparation showed that this was not a crime of passion but a carefully calculated act of revenge. On the morning of the 27th of January 2025, everything seemed normal in the Pathundi colony. Sudakaran was preparing to leave his house to meet Akila at the bus stand, while his elderly mother Lakshmi was going about her usual morning routine. Neither of them was aware that Chenthamara was watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The local community had no idea that years of simmering hatred and resentment were about to explode into deadly violence. Despite all the warning signs, the complaints to police, and the obvious threats, the systems that were supposed to protect innocent people had failed completely, setting the stage for one of the most brutal crimes in the area's recent history. At approximately 9:30 a.m. on Monday, the 27th of January 2025, the morning calm of Pathundi colony was shattered by screams and the sound of violence. Chenthamara had been watching Sudakaran's house and waiting for the right moment to carry out his long-planned revenge. As Sudakaran prepared to leave his home to meet his daughter Akila at the bus stand, and as his elderly mother Lakshmi went about her morning activities, Chenthamara emerged from his hiding place with his modified billhook weapon. The attack occurred in broad daylight, outside the victim's residence, in full view of neighbors and passers-by. This public nature of the violence demonstrated Chenthamara's complete disregard for consequences and his desire to send a message of terror to the entire community. He was not trying to hide his actions or escape undetected. He wanted everyone to witness his revenge. Sudakaran was likely the first to be attacked, as he was preparing to leave the house. Chenthamara struck him down with multiple blows from the billhook, inflicting fatal slash wounds that would cause massive blood loss and ensure death. The weapon's curved blade and the additional reach provided by the attached stick allowed Chenthamara to deliver devastating blows while maintaining some distance from his victim. Lakshmi, the 6-8-year-old mother, either witnessed the attack on her son or was attacked shortly afterward. Despite her age and physical vulnerability, she likely tried to help her son or escape the violence, but Chenthamara showed no mercy. He hacked her to death with the same brutal efficiency he had shown in killing Sudakaran, inflicting multiple fatal wounds that left no chance of survival. The attack was described by police as being carried out with meticulous planning and showed clear evidence of premeditation. Chenthamara had not only prepared his weapon in advance, but had also chosen his timing carefully to maximize the impact of his violence. The fact that he was able to kill both victims so quickly suggested that he had rehearsed his attack plan and knew exactly how he intended to carry it out. Neighbors who witnessed the attack were initially frozen with shock and terror. The brutality of the violence and the calm, methodical way Chenthamara carried it out left observers struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Some people began screaming, while others ran to get help, but the attack was over so quickly that there was no opportunity for intervention. The crime scene was described as horrific, with both victims lying in pools of blood from their multiple slash wounds. The billhook weapon had caused devastating injuries that would have resulted in rapid death from blood loss and trauma. The positioning of the bodies and the pattern of blood spatter told the story of victims who had tried to defend themselves or escape but were overwhelmed by their attackers' violence and determination. After completing his attack, Chenthamara made no immediate attempt to help his victims or show any remorse for his actions. Instead, he calmly walked away from the scene, leaving his neighbors to discover the carnage and call for help. His behavior in the immediate aftermath of the murders was described by police as showing no remorse and suggesting that he was satisfied that his plan had succeeded. Emergency services were called to the scene, but there was nothing that could be done for Sudhakaran and Lakshmi. Both victims were pronounced dead at the scene, their lives ended by a neighbor who had harbored years of resentment and had finally acted on his violent fantasies. The paramedics and police officers who responded to the call were confronted with a scene of devastating violence that would haunt them for years to come. As news of the double murder spread through the community, panic and fear began to take hold. Residents realized that the man they had all feared for years had finally carried out his threats, and many began to worry about their own safety. The fact that Chanthamara had fled the scene and was still at large added to the community's terror, as no one knew where he might strike next. The initial police response was swift, with officers arriving at the scene within minutes of receiving the emergency calls. However, by the time they arrived, Chanthamara had already disappeared, beginning what would become a 36-hour manhunt through the forests and hills surrounding Pathundi. The immediate priority was securing the crime scene and beginning the search for the suspect. The bodies of Sudhakaran and Lakshmi were moved to Alathur Government Hospital for post-mortem examination, which would confirm the cause of death as multiple slash wounds inflicted by a sharp weapon. The medical examination would also provide forensic evidence that would be used in the prosecution of Chanthamara once he was captured. Meanwhile, Akila waited at the Nenmara bus stand for her father to arrive, unaware that he had been murdered. When he failed to appear at their agreed meeting time, she began to worry and tried to contact family members. It was only when neighbors reached her with the devastating news that she learned she had lost both her father and grandmother in a single, horrific attack. The timing of the attack was particularly cruel, as it occurred just as Sudhakaran was about to meet his daughter for what should have been a routine trip to the bank. If Akila had decided to go home instead of meeting her father at the bus stand, she likely would have been killed along with Sudhakaran and Lakshmi. Her decision to stay away from the house due to her fear of Chanthamara had inadvertently saved her life. The weapon used in the attack was left at the scene, providing clear evidence of Chanthamara's guilt. The modified billhook, with its attached stick for increased reach and leverage, demonstrated the premeditated nature of the crime and his intention to cause maximum harm to his victims. The weapon's design showed that Chanthamara had put considerable thought into how to most effectively kill his targets. As the immediate chaos began to subside, the full magnitude of the tragedy became clear. 2 innocent people were dead, killed by a neighbor who had been failed by the justice system and allowed to remain free despite clear evidence of his danger to the community. The victims' family members were left to grapple with both their grief and their anger at the authorities who had failed to protect their loved ones. Within hours of the double murder, news of the brutal killings spread throughout the Palakkad district and beyond. The shocking nature of the crime, a man killing his neighbors in broad daylight after already being charged with murdering another family member, captured public attention and sparked outrage about the failures of the justice system that had allowed such violence to occur. The immediate priority for law enforcement was launching a comprehensive manhunt to capture Chanthamara before he could harm anyone else. Police teams led by Alathur Deputy Superintendent N. Muralidharan mobilized more than 100 officers to search for the suspect. The operation focused initially on the forested areas surrounding Pathundi, as witnesses had seen Chanthamara fleeing toward the nearby hills immediately after the attack. Local residents, despite their fear, volunteered to assist in the search efforts. The community's anger and desire for justice overcame their terror, and many people joined the police in combing through potential hiding spots where Chanthamara might have taken refuge. This cooperation between law enforcement and civilians demonstrated the community's determination to see the killer brought to justice. The search operation was complicated by Chanthamara's intimate knowledge of the local terrain. As a longtime resident of the area, he knew every path, hiding spot, and escape route in the surrounding forests and hills. Police later confirmed that he had used the same forest area as a refuge after killing Sajitha in 2019, making it his preferred location for evading capture after committing violent crimes. Meanwhile, the victims' families were left to grapple with their devastating loss. Akila and Athulya, Sudhakaran's daughters, suddenly found themselves orphaned, having lost their mother to murder in 2019, and now their father and grandmother to the same killer. The trauma of losing multiple family members to the same perpetrator created a level of grief and anger that was almost impossible to comprehend. "Everyone will leave after a few days. After that, we will be alone," Akila said in the immediate aftermath of the murders, capturing the isolation and abandonment that victims' families often feel after such tragedies. Her words reflected not only her personal grief, but also her awareness that the community's attention would eventually move on. leaving her and her sister to rebuild their lives without the support systems that had been destroyed by violence. The public response to the murders was immediate and angry. Residents of Nenmara and surrounding areas criticized the police for their failure to act on the repeated complaints about Chenthamara's violations of his bail conditions. Many people pointed out that if the authorities had done their job properly, both Sudhakaran and Lakshmi would still be alive. If the police had done anything on time, we would not have been orphaned, Akila said, directly blaming law enforcement for their family's tragedy. Her statement reflected the community's broader frustration with a system that seemed designed to protect criminals rather than victims, allowing dangerous individuals to remain free despite clear evidence of their threat to public safety. Political leaders and civil society organizations quickly seized upon the case as an example of the broader failures in India's criminal justice system. The fact that Chenthamara had been able to violate his bail conditions for weeks without consequence, make direct threats against his eventual victims, and still remain free to carry out his revenge plan highlighted serious problems with how bail conditions are monitored and enforced. On January 28, the day after the murders, hundreds of people gathered to pay their last respects to Sudhakaran and Lakshmi. The bodies were brought to their residence in Pathundi for public viewing around 2 p.m. after post-mortem procedures were completed. The large turnout demonstrated the community's shock and grief over the loss of two well-regarded neighbors who had been killed simply for existing in the path of a madman's revenge. The investigation team continued their intensive search for Chenthamara throughout the day and night following the murders. Police divided their forces into 4 teams and expanded their search to include the forests and hills of Nellyampathy. They also took Chenthamara's brother Radha into custody for questioning, hoping he might provide information about where the suspect might be hiding. However, the brother's statements provided no substantial information about Chenthamara's whereabouts. This lack of cooperation from family members, whether due to genuine ignorance or fear of retribution, hampered the investigation and allowed Chenthamara to remain at large for longer than authorities had hoped. The police faced heavy criticism not only from the victims' families, but also from political leaders and the general public. The failure to enforce bail conditions, respond to complaints, and prevent the murders despite clear warning signs created a crisis of confidence in law enforcement's ability to protect the community from dangerous criminals. As a direct result of this criticism and the obvious failures in the case, Nenmara Station House Officer, So. Mahendra Simhan, was suspended from duty on January 28. The suspension came after Palakkad Superintendent of Police Ajith Kumar submitted a report highlighting the police's failure to act, despite knowing that Chenthamara had violated his bail conditions and was threatening local residents. The suspension of the SHO sent a message that accountability would be demanded from law enforcement officials who failed in their duties. However, for the victims' families, this administrative action came too late to save their loved ones, and felt more like an attempt to deflect blame than a genuine effort to prevent future tragedies. Meanwhile, the search for Chenthamara continued through the night, with police using their knowledge of his previous behavior patterns to predict where he might be hiding. During the 2019 Sajitha murder case, he had also fled to the forest, and had eventually been captured when hunger forced him to return home for food. Police hoped that the same pattern would repeat itself and positioned teams near his house and other locations where he might appear. The capture of Chenthamara on the evening of the 28th of January 2025, after a 36-hour manhunt, marked the beginning of a legal process that would expose the deeper systemic failures that had enabled his crimes. He was found hiding in the Matai forest area of Pothundi, exactly where police had expected, based on his previous pattern of behavior. His arrest came when hunger finally forced him to attempt a return to his house for food, just as had happened after the 2019 murder of Sajitha. When Chenthamara was brought before the Alathur First-Class Judicial Magistrate Court on January 29, his behavior shocked everyone present. Rather than showing remorse or attempting to defend his actions, he told the court that he should be punished for 100 years for his crimes and that he did not want to come out of prison ever again. He stated that he could not face his engineer daughter and son-in-law, suggesting some level of awareness about the shame his actions had brought upon his family. The court remanded Chenthamara to 14 days in custody, and the investigation team announced their intention to seek additional custody time to conduct evidence collection and crime scene recreation. His calm demeanor and apparent satisfaction with his crimes disturbed court observers and reinforced the perception that he was a dangerous individual who posed an ongoing threat to society. In the police remand report, investigators revealed that Chenthamara had shown no remorse for his crimes and appeared to take satisfaction in the success of his plan. The report noted that he had carried out the murders with meticulous planning, and that his enmity with Sudhakaran and Lakshmi had been building for years. This evidence of premeditation would be crucial in ensuring that he faced the most serious possible charges for his crimes. The case prompted broader discussions about the effectiveness of India's bail system and the monitoring of individuals who are released pending trial for serious violent crimes. Legal experts pointed out that Chenthamara's case demonstrated how easily bail conditions could be violated without consequences, creating dangerous situations for potential victims who had no effective legal protection. The suspension of SHO Mahendra Simhan led to a broader review of police procedures for handling complaints about bail violations and threats against witnesses. Additional Director General of Police, Law and Order, Manoj Abraham ordered a comprehensive investigation into the police failures that had contributed to the murders, sending a message that accountability would be demanded from law enforcement at all levels. For the victims' families, the long-term impact of the murders extended far beyond their immediate grief. Akhila and Athulya were left not only orphaned but also traumatized by the knowledge that their family had been systematically destroyed by a single individual who had been failed by the justice system. Their demands for Chenthamara to be hanged to death reflected their anger at a system that had allowed him to kill 3 members of their family over the course of 6 years. The economic impact on the surviving family members was also significant. With Sudhakaran dead, the family lost their primary breadwinner, creating financial hardships that compounded their emotional trauma. Akhila, who was still an undergraduate student, faced uncertainty about her ability to continue her education while also caring for her maternal grandparents, who now had only her to rely on for support. The case became a catalyst for discussions about the need for stronger witness protection programs in India's criminal justice system. The fact that Chenthamara had been able to openly threaten and ultimately kill witnesses in his previous case highlighted the inadequacy of existing protections for people who cooperate with law enforcement in prosecuting violent criminals. Women's rights organizations used the case to highlight the particular vulnerability of women to violence from men who blame them for their personal failures. Chenthamara's belief that women in his community were practicing black magic against him reflected broader patterns of misogynistic thinking that often underlies violence against women in India and other parts of the world. The psychological impact on the broader Pathundi community was profound and lasting. Neighbors who had lived in fear of Chenthamara for years were traumatized by the realization that their worst fears had come true. The fact that he had carried out his murders in broad daylight, in full view of the community, created a sense of vulnerability that would take years to overcome. Local mental health professionals noted that the community would likely suffer from collective trauma for years to come. The knowledge that they had been unable to protect their neighbors despite multiple warnings and complaints created feelings of guilt and helplessness that extended far beyond the immediate victims' families. The case also highlighted the role that superstition and belief in supernatural forces can play in motivating violence. Chenthamara's conviction that his neighbors were practicing sorcery against him reflected broader problems with education and rational thinking in some rural communities, where traditional beliefs sometimes provide justification for violence against vulnerable individuals. Educational institutions in Kerala began incorporating discussions about the case into their curricula about violence prevention and community safety. The murders served as a powerful example of how individual hatred and systemic failures can combine to create tragic outcomes that devastate entire communities. Legal reforms were proposed to address some of the systemic problems highlighted by the case. These included better monitoring of bail compliance, stronger penalties for violating bail conditions, and improved training for police officers on handling domestic violence and threat complaints. However, the implementation of such reforms would require sustained political will and resources that were not immediately forthcoming. The case became part of broader discussions about mental health and community safety in India. Chenthamara's obviously disturbed behavior and belief in conspiracy theories raised questions about how communities should respond to individuals who show signs of dangerous psychological problems. The lack of accessible mental health services in rural areas like Pathundi meant that there were few options for addressing such problems before they escalated to violence. For law enforcement agencies across Kerala and India, the case served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of failing to take threats and complaints seriously. The suspension of the Nenmar SHO sent a message that police officers would be held accountable for their failures, but it also highlighted the need for better training and resources to help officers recognize and respond to warning signs of impending violence. The media coverage of the case brought national attention to issues of rural violence and justice system failures that often go unnoticed in India's smaller communities. The shocking nature of the murders and the clear evidence of systemic failures made it impossible for authorities to dismiss the case as an isolated incident or local problem. Years after the murders, the case continued to influence discussions about criminal justice reform in India. Chenthamara's ability to carry out his revenge plan despite multiple opportunities for intervention became a textbook example of how systems failures can enable violence against innocent people. Legal scholars and criminologists studied the case to identify lessons that could be applied to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The empty house where Sudhakaran and Lakshmi had lived became a haunting reminder of the violence that had torn apart a family and traumatized a community. Local residents avoided the area, and the property remained vacant as a stark symbol of the consequences of hatred and the failure of systems designed to protect innocent people. For Akila and Athulya, rebuilding their lives after losing 3 family members to the same killer required not only personal healing but also a difficult process of seeking justice through India's slow-moving court system. Their demands for the death penalty for Chenthamara reflected not only their desire for revenge but also their fear that he might somehow be released again to continue his campaign of violence against their family. The case ultimately served as a powerful reminder that protecting communities from violence requires not just laws and police officers, but also vigilant enforcement of those laws and a willingness to take action when warning signs appear. The deaths of Sajitha, Sudhakaran, and Lakshmi could have been prevented if the systems designed to protect them had functioned properly, making their murders not just personal tragedies but also institutional failures that demanded accountability and reform. On the 27th of January 2025, 5 8-year-old Chenthamara brutally murdered his neighbors, 6 8-year-old Lakshmi, and her 5 0-year-old son Sudhakaran, in broad daylight outside their home in Pathundi village near Nenmara, Kerala. This horrific double murder was the completion of a revenge plan that began in 2019 when Chenthamara killed Sudhakaran's first wife, Sajitha, believing she and other women in the community were practicing black magic against him. Despite being charged with Sajitha's murder, Chenthamara was released on interim bail in December 2024, with conditions prohibiting him from entering the Nenmara area. However, he violated these conditions by moving back to his house in the same colony as his victims, openly threatening them while police ignored multiple complaints from the family. On the morning of January 27, as Sudhakaran prepared to meet his daughter Akila at the bus stand, Chenthamara attacked with a modified billhook weapon, hacking both victims to death before fleeing to nearby forests. After a 36-hour manhunt involving over 100 officers, he was captured while returning home for food. When brought to court, Chenthamara showed no remorse, telling the judge to punish me for 100 years and expressing satisfaction with his crimes. The case exposed massive police failures, leading to the suspension of the local station officer and highlighting systemic problems with bail monitoring and witness protection in India's criminal justice system. Sudhakaran's daughters, now orphaned after losing 3 family members to the same killer, demanded the death penalty while criticizing authorities for failing to prevent the tragedy despite clear warning signs. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.